This podcast explores themes of murder and rape. Listener discretion is advised. The words of Jeffrey Dahmer are voiced by an actor.
Not only was the deceased dismembered, but then the bones were broken apart with a sledgehammer.
Dahmer is serving 15 consecutive life sentences for the murders of 17 males.
The most prolific slayer in the history of the state of Wisconsin.
From 1978 to 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys, attempted to kill at least 2 others, and attacked, drugged, and abused countless more. He cannibalized some of his victims, dismembered their bodies, preyed on the vulnerable, and took advantage of pre-existing stigma to become one of the most depraved serial killers in American history. But what's the real story of this most unlikely of killers? Over the course of 6 episodes, we'll speak to detectives, journalists, survivors, and witnesses to dive deep into the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, tracking his trajectory as a killer and exposing the many opportunities that were lost to prevent his reign of terror. And ultimately asking, could this ever happen again? I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Season 4 of Mind of a Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer. Episode 1, First Kill. It's June 18th, 1978, and we're in Bath Township, Ohio. Here, within a large ranch-style house, 2 young men are drinking beers. One of them, a handsome, long-haired 18-year-old named Stephen Hicks, is on his way to a rock concert. This isn't his house. It belongs to Jeff, the hospitable stranger he's drinking with and who had offered him a ride earlier that day. But it's getting late now and Hicks needs to leave. He thanks his companion Jeff and attempts to say goodbye. But something inside Jeff snaps. He doesn't want Stephen Hicks to leave. Jeff grabs a barbell and with all his strength, whacks it hard over the back of Stephen Hicks' head. Then, using the same barbell, he strangles the life out of Hicks' young body. You see, the host is Jeffrey Dahmer, and this is his first kill. To understand how we get to this point, we need to go back to the beginning, to Dahmer's childhood and teenage years.
As a very young boy, he was very happy, and he would run to me and jump into my arms. And he loved his grandparents, my mother and father, and just was a very happy little boy.
You're listening to the voice of Jeffrey Dahmer's father, Lionel, who spoke to the Mind of a Monster team in 2020. He and his then-wife, Joyce, welcomed baby Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer into the world in May 1960 and moved to Bath, Ohio several years later.
When he was very little, we had a very close relationship. He wanted to be held and would come running up to me whenever I'd come home. He just loved to be with me and his mother.
With violent offenders, it's tempting to sift through their childhood for an aha moment, an incident that serves as a key to unlock the secret of their violent trajectory. With Jeffrey Dahmer, this is incredibly difficult. Despite some tensions at home, which we will come to, his life is not so different to most. In fact, it's one of relative privilege. He lives in a lovely family home in a picturesque white-collar town and attends good schools. His father is a scientist and his mother is a teletype machine instructor. She suffers from depression and is medicated with some episodes of mental ill health, all of which can be troubling for a child. But as far as we know, Jeffrey is not abused and does not suffer neglect at a young age. The only incident of note during his very early years is a double hernia operation, which must have been painful, but lots of kids have operations. I want to know what his classmates thought of him, so I speak with Mike Kukral, who was the same year as Dahmer in high school.
You know, it's funny because if you don't talk about him, then people will make up stories about you and Jeff Dahmer. So it's better to talk about him and tell the truth because I just knew him in high school And that was it. And people are always saying things like, well, he was best friends with Jeff Dahmer and they hung around all the time. And I'm like, no, that didn't happen. Last time I saw him was high school. And I don't think he had any best friends, actually, but we all knew him. But yeah, so I always tell people about it before they make up stories.
I can see why you want to get in front of that and make sure that you're the one telling the story first. Please explain to me how you first met Jeffrey Dahmer.
I met Jeffrey Dahmer when we were all thrown into junior high school together. So I didn't know him until 7th grade, but everyone went to the same junior high and high school. And you were thrown in and had to meet all these new people, and Jeff Dahmer was just one of those.
What was your impression of him when you first met him?
That's a good question. I don't know if anybody has first impressions when they're in 7th grade. People ask me, was he strange? And I say everybody in 7th grade was strange. But, when I think back to 7th grade and Jeff Dahmer, he was sort of quiet from what I remember at that time, but he was always a nice kid. And he liked to read like fantasy books. I remember him reading Dune, which was a really challenging book to read. And I remember talking to him about that, what's that book about? And he was just sort of goofy and didn't give it any serious answers. But, I had classes with him. He was in biology class with me. He was in gym class with me. And I just remember him as one of the kids, not somebody that I became close friends with at all, but one of the kids that was like, okay, but, a little quiet and, always seemed to be off doing something sort of on his own a little bit. I think he had some friends. He played in the band too. He played trumpet in the band. He played tennis. He was on the tennis team actually. And so, he did things that I did as well. And he lived right across the street from some of my really better friends.
By the time Dahmer is in his teens, home life has become hard. His father works a lot and his mother's depression is worsening. The pressure on his parents' relationship has gotten to a breaking point, and divorce is now on the horizon. Yet, both parents continue to care for their children, and Lionel is keen for his son to cultivate an interest in science, often taking Jeffrey with him to work.
I took him to the lab with me and showed him how litmus paper changes color with acids and bases, which all of us know. And he wasn't that extremely interested in it, but he listened and he seemed to enjoy what I was telling him. I was able to give Jeff some knowledge of chemistry, I thought, and he liked walking over to the lab with me,
But it's not chemistry the young boy is interested in. That would come later. It's biology. He frequently collects roadkill to dissect and examine. Anyone with even a passing interest in crime and psychology will know that cruelty to animals can be an early red flag with violent offenders. But it doesn't seem as though Dahmer is killing these creatures. He's collecting them once they're already dead. In fact, Jeffrey Dahmer would later speak extensively about his life and crimes, making a point of saying as much. The words you are about to hear are Jeffrey Dahmer's, spoken by an actor.
I never killed animals. Never did that. I always used dead ones just for experimentation.
The young boy might not be harming the animals while they're alive, but there are hints that his interest in their dead anatomy is going well beyond what would be expected.
I don't think there were any really red flags, except for if indeed he was doing something sexual while he was feeling the insides of these roadkill animals.
Did you ever hear any disturbing stories or anything that stood out for you about him?
Well, when I was, I think in maybe, I'm going to say 9th grade, we took biology class and Dahmer was in the class. And one of the things we had to do was dissect a fetal pig. There were several of them for the class to use. You worked on it in teams. And somebody stole one of the fetal pigs when the teacher counted up one of them as missing. And that was big news in the school because that's not something you did. You didn't steal things out of a classroom. You didn't steal a fetal pig. And the principal got on the loudspeaker, the intercom, every morning for a long time and talked about that. Now, whoever stole that fetal pig, just bring it back and no questions asked this time. And then it got more threatening and more threatening. When we find you, whoever stole that pig, you're in big trouble. So it went on a long time. And when you're 14 or 15 years old, that's a very funny thing to happen. And we just would laugh and laugh and laugh about that. I wonder who stole it. And we had our guesses, but, and then you move on to something else and you forget about it. And here it is, all these years later, I'm watching an interview with Jeffrey Dahmer, and he's talking about high school, and he was the one who stole the fetal pig. Jeff Dahmer stole it. Of course, it was Jeff Dahmer.
Do you think this is part of his humor, to do things like steal a pig?
He learned that he could get away with stuff maybe when he did that.
Stories about Dahmer's jokes and pranks come thick and fast from those who knew him as a child and teenager. From pretending to have seizures in a shopping mall to tormenting the school librarian. The general impression is of a boy who's quiet, awkward, on the fringes of friendship groups, and who can get away with often very bizarre practical jokes. He strikes me as a teenager who's desperate for validation and acknowledgement, but disrespectful of authority and unfearful of consequence.
He had a funny sense of humor. He made us laugh a lot. And it wasn't telling jokes or anything. It was more about imitating people and acting crazy. And some of that was like in junior high, but I think more of it played out in high school. And probably what was pretty funny to most of us is that he got into photographs in the high school yearbook, group photographs, in groups that he was not a member. And the best known, of course, is the National Honor Society. And he's right in the middle of the group photograph, but his head is blacked out, so you can't see any head there. It's just blacked out photo. And in retrospective, that's pretty creepy to look at now.
Was he smart?
Oh, was Jeff Dahmer smart? I'd say he was a very intelligent guy. He had a lot of brains to him, that he did well in junior high, and he liked science, and he did pretty well as far as I know. And I think something changed, though, by the end of high school, and he wasn't interested in school anymore, and I know he wasn't attending classes anymore regularly, but I think he's a very smart guy, and I think that's one of the reasons he got away with the things he did for so long.
One of the reasons he fails to engage with school as he used to is a growing dependency on alcohol. His father, Lionel, becomes increasingly concerned.
He had several good friends that he knew well, and one of the friends had alcoholic beverages their parents had in the home. Unfortunately, Jeff got started drinking too much. And we told the teachers and other students, too, that something should be done about it, but nothing was done about the alcoholic situation.
Mike, tell us about Jeffrey Dahmer's drinking.
We noticed that he was, acting different, not coming to class, failing classes, hanging out in the parking lot all day. I really don't remember him a whole lot from our senior year. He sort of started to drift away and go somewhere else physically and mentally as well. I remember he didn't come to German class, and he was standing in the hallway, and he kept putting his face right on the window of the classroom, the little window, like 8x10 window, and pushing his face up against it. And we could all see him, but the German teacher couldn't because she's facing us. And he was failing classes, and we knew that. So I did see a shift, because I'd say from junior high, he was a good student, got through everything, did well in classes. And by the end of our senior year, though, he was moving into his own world and had gone somewhere else mentally. And part of that was his connection to drinking, and part of that was what was going on in his brain that we had no idea.
It's during his senior year that divorce proceedings between his parents begin. Annie Schwartz is the author of Monster, the true story of the Jeffrey Dahmer murders, and was a young journalist in the 1990s covering Jeffrey Dahmer's case. She believes the divorce hit Dahmer exceptionally hard.
When talking about the fact that Jeffrey Dahmer was a product of divorced parents, which we used to call back in the time when this happened, a broken home. I mean, just think of the ways we talked about those kinds of things. His parents just didn't divorce, all right? His father moved out. And Joyce was leaving Jeffrey alone for prolonged periods of time in the house when he's in high school. He's drinking. So is he drinking because of the age-old reason that people become alcoholics because they are escaping? They want not to be in touch with the real world. They don't feel like they're enough. I'm not qualified to make that observation, but I can tell you that when we talk about those building blocks of this case and the killer that is Jeffrey Dahmer, we started with a mother who was depressed and anxious. The parents are fighting. We're putting all of that together, almost like a timeline. So did his parents' divorce affect him? Sure.
Lionel Dahmer describes in vivid detail the impact of the impending divorce on his son.
When I talked to Jeff about the divorce, he went out and started slapping trees with a branch. I think the divorce had an effect of ripping away any amount of control over life that he could have had. I think it just depleted him completely of control of his existence. He didn't know what to do.
I want you to take note of the word control, because Dahmer's need for control is an incredibly important motif throughout the story. One area of his life he has no control over is his sexuality. He's known he's gay since his early teens, but to be gay in the 1970s is no picnic. Discrimination means that many keep the truth of their sexuality secret, and teenage Jeffrey Dahmer is no exception.
I knew what my orientation was around 13. It just seemed to be the way things were. I had friends and everything, but the important issues I kept to myself. The first encounter I had with anyone was the kid across the street. We were both about the same age. It was consensual in a fort. That was really the first time, but it was just very light sex. Kissing, holding, that type of thing. I was 14. I think he was 14, something like that. It was consensual.
It's more than possible that part of the reason he's drinking so much is because of his struggles with his sexuality. Acceptance in the 1970s is a million miles away from what it is today. It's only in 1973 that homosexuality is removed as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association. Homophobic discrimination is still legally acceptable, and his parents' eventual divorce takes place just weeks before the assassination of Harvey Milk. But Jeffrey Dahmer's awakening desires quickly take a disturbing twist. What his parents and high school classmates do not know is the troubled class joker has been cultivating some incredibly dark fantasies. Fantasies of engaging in sexual activity with a dead male body.
I have no idea why I started getting the fantasies and thoughts. When I was about 16, that's when it started kicking in.
It is a desire that we label necrophilia. Dr. Fred Berlin is a world-renowned authority on deviant sexual behavior and would go on to spend hours interviewing and assessing Jeffrey Dahmer. I want to draw on his expertise to get to the bottom of these disturbing fantasies. From your perspective, what do you think was driving those particular sexual fantasies? Because most of us are not turned on by corpses.
Well, that's something that we really don't talk much about and are trying to learn more about, which is why do any of us experience the sexual desires that we do? In studying that, we can look at nature or nurture, but perhaps one of the most important points for people to understand is that we don't experience the particular desires that we have because of some choice that we've made. In other words, when I was a little boy, I didn't sit down and say, do I want to grow up to be attracted to women? If I'm going to experience attractions to corpses, it's not because I'm a bad little kid who weighs my options and decides this is what's going to turn me on. In growing up, I discover that that's the nature of my sexual makeup, and then I have to cope in the world from a very different perspective. And if I may, why that's so important right at this moment is as we're speaking. There's numbers of 16, 17-year-old youngsters out there privately aware of the fact that they're experiencing frightening, unacceptable, problematic sorts of sexual attractions, cravings, feelings. And because of the stigma that our society attaches to that, the last thing they're going to do is raise their hand and come and ask for help. They're not even going to tell their best friend or their family about that.
No, they're not going to risk being ostracized.
Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that we should be accepting of the kind of behavior Mr. Dahmer engaged in, but what I am suggesting is that a young, troubled adolescent who's experiencing these kinds of feelings needs to be able to come forward and get help.
I agree with you with zero equivocation. The only way that one can actually address somebody's homicidal urges or necrophilia urges is if there is a safe place for them to seek treatment. But for Jeffrey Dahmer, there was no such safe place. Can we reflect back on his childhood a little bit? Were there any potential red flags that you saw that rose to the surface for you?
Well, really what surprised me was how, in so many ways, his childhood was fairly normal. Now, in retrospect, one could look back. There was a time when he had an interest in taxidermy. So you look back and say, my goodness, maybe that should have been a red flag. But how many young people have an interest in taxidermy who don't end up to be serial killers and don't end up having necrophilia? So had I met Mr. Dahmer during his childhood, and assuming that he wasn't going to be in a position to talk about the privacy of what he was experiencing sexually, I don't think I would have seen many red flags as to where he was heading.
And how could anyone have known where he was heading? There's a risk in cases like Jeffrey Dahmer's of judging it with hindsight, when in reality there was no way for those around him to predict the path he would take. When we hear hooves, we think horses, not zebras. And Dahmer is secretive, very, very secretive. By the time he reaches his senior year, something in his psyche is changed forever. He's been coveting the body of a handsome young jogger he sees often in his neighborhood. He has become active and alert to the possibility of having him. Jeffrey Dahmer is a predator in waiting. As graduation approaches, Dahmer's interest in death and the inner workings of the male body spill into the real world. Mike Kukral recalls a chilling incident in the school hallway.
Now, I think this is at Revere at the high school, and the hallways are crowded between classes, like always, lots of people walking up and down the hallway, and I'm standing there by my locker, and Jeff Dahmer comes walking down the hallway. I don't think anything of that. I don't even see him probably. But he just sort of leans over real quick and puts his head on my chest for like 5 seconds. I said, I want to listen to your heart. And then he was gone. And that was it. And that was part of his sense of humor. I mean, at the time, you just thought, that's goofy Jeff. That's quirky Jeff Dahmer. There's nothing evil or sick about that.
It takes on a whole different meaning now that you know what you know about Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer's mind is far away from his classmates and grades. Increasingly left to his own devices, his thoughts are still fixed on the jogger. Annie Schwartz.
This was a muscular young man, kind of thin, athletic, and he's attracted to that. So he is obsessed with this jogger. He plans to try and figure out how can he get that jogger? How can he meet him? How can he live out his fantasy with him? What can he do?
He takes a baseball bat out with him one day and lies in wait for the jogger to come. This teenage boy is a toxic mix of hormones, adrenaline, and disturbing desire. The jogger doesn't show. It's a week or so after graduation, and we're back at the Dahmer's family home, but there is nothing homey about it. The cupboards are bare, and the place is a mess. Joyce Dahmer has moved out permanently, and Lionel Dahmer is living in a motel. Without the routine of high school or the presence of his parents, Jeffrey Dahmer is home alone most of the time, with only his dark fantasies about male bodies, like that of the joggers, to occupy his mind. I return to Dr. Fred Berlin. Of course, having absent parents must be upsetting, but there is such a tendency for all of us to go back to the childhood and teenage years and search for that one moment to make it make sense.
Yeah, and we like to think there's a life story that helps us understand it. That was kind of the way the Freudian psychiatry of the 1950s was, that we can figure out what went wrong during early psychological maturation and development. Having developed that insight and the emotional release, the problem is somehow magically solved. It doesn't usually work that way. Now, there are situations such as people who tend to have what we call antisocial personality disorder, where we see behavioral problems early on and then the pattern just continues. But there's nothing of that sort that was present in the case of Mr. Dahmer.
No, that's right. And I get very frustrated when I see people try to create trauma where there was no trauma. People talk about divorce a lot. Well, we'd have half of our kids running around killing people if truly it had that level of impact.
Yeah, again, in the history of psychiatry, tragically, of blaming parents, we used to talk about a schizophrenic mother. Bad mothering has nothing to do with developing schizophrenia. So we really have to get away from these stories that in a way sometimes comfort us because we think we understand, and admit there's a lot that we don't know. And we don't know why people develop the particular sexual cravings they do. We need to do more research on that, and we need to be open to the idea there's a spectrum of human sexuality, and where it's causing problems, be able to address it and prevent it.
It's an excellent point. And when we can open up the dialogue and open up the research, we will have fewer victims if, as you say, there is a place to actually seek that help. But all of that being said, what the divorce did do was create an environmental situation for Jeffrey Dahmer where he's home alone.
Being alone allowed for much more time for him to just be preoccupied with his fantasies and urges, to be in a situation where there wasn't any supervision.
Once I had the opportunity and a place where I could actually make these fantasies come true, then trying to hold them back was just seemed to be too much. Desire grew and grew more constant, stronger. Thoughts of a good-looking, well-built guy having total control over him. I don't know if killing ever came into play, but if that was the only way to keep him, then that would be done.
Not long after graduation, Mike Kukrold bumps into Jeffrey Dahmer.
When we graduated in June of '78, we had a party maybe a week after graduation, and it was a party out on a farm, and there were a couple kegs of beer there, and for a lot of us it was the first time we drank a bunch of beer. Maybe there was a bonfire, and it was a pretty nice setting, and everybody had fun and got along really well. And I was driving home that night, and it wasn't super late, but you know, it was summer, we graduated, and it was probably 1 a.m. I was driving home and sort of a back road, and I see somebody walking on the road, and this is a road where there's no lights, it's mostly woods, and there's not a lot of houses, and it's Jeff Dahmer. And that's not surprising to see people after a party sometimes, you know, trying to get home. And so I obviously pulled over, hey, you want to ride? You know, and he doesn't say anything, he just gets in the car. And I could tell he had a lot to drink. And I drove him to his house a couple miles away on my way home, and pulled in his driveway, and I asked him a couple things like, hey, what are you doing this fall, and what's going on this summer, are you working? And I don't remember any answers from him. I don't remember him being very talkative, and I thought, okay, he's had a lot to drink, I guess, a lot of beer. And I noticed his house was really dark, but the thing was, it was late at night, so I just assumed everybody was asleep in his house. Later I would learn, no, the utilities were off and he was living there alone, and I didn't know that. And so I said bye to him, see you later. He got out of my car and went in his house that June of 1978, and I never saw him again.
By now, the craving to have a submissive male body is all-consuming. Then, on the fateful day of June 18th, 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer is driving alone when he notices a young man on the road. He's shirtless and wearing jeans and tennis shoes.
I had the car about 5 o'clock at night, and I was driving back home after drinking. I wasn't looking for anyone, but about a mile away from the house, there he was, hitchhiking along the road. He was attractive. I was attracted to him. I stopped and thought, well, should I pick him up or not? And I asked him if he wanted to go back and smoke some pot, and he said, oh yeah.
The attractive man is Stephen Hicks. He has also just graduated from high school and is hitching a ride to a rock concert at Chippewa Lake Park. He gets into the car and the pair drive off toward Dahmer's house. It is the last journey Stephen Hicks will ever make, alive. I return to Dr. Fred Berlin. Can you describe what happened to Stephen Hicks?
Mr. Dahmer, from sort of his early teenage years, if not before that, was aware of having these strong urges to have sex with a dead body. In fact, he was virtually impotent with people while they were alive. It's just that he hadn't yet reached a point of acting on that. And so the fuse had already been lit. In other words, he was predisposed. He was like the trigger that was ready to be pulled. And then the circumstances come together where he picks up this hitchhiker. It appears that Mr. Hicks went with him completely voluntarily.
And we went into my bedroom, had some beer. And from the time I spent with him, I could tell he wasn't gay. I didn't know how to keep him there, other than to get the barbell and to hit him with it over the head. And strangled him with the same barbell.
And that, of course, was the first time that he committed a murder. But it was inevitable in my mind that at some point that killing was going to occur, because all of the preceding parts of his life, all of the preceding development of his sexuality, the pieces were already in place.
Now, 18-year-old Jeffrey Dahmer is in a situation he's always fantasized about. He's alone with a dead body. Like the countless animals he's experimented with before, Dahmer cuts the body up, hacking, slicing, and carving with a knife.
The first time, I didn't know how to dispose of the remains. And so, but once I started doing it, it became sexually exciting to me. A frantic attempt to undo what I'd gotten myself into. Took the head, washed it off, put it on the bathroom floor, masturbated and all that, then put the head back down with the rest of the bags.
Can you explain the reasons for the dismemberment, psychologically speaking?
A couple of reasons. One, he was, and this is gruesome, turned on by observing internal anatomy. So the dismembering was part of wanting to dissect the bodies and tied into the kind of sexual excitement that he got from doing that. The dismembering was also done because in many cases he had to have a way of disposing of the bodies, and therefore by dismembering them, he could get them in the garbage bag or something and dispose of them.
After a day or so, he stuffs the dismembered body into 2 trash bags, which he puts in the back seat of his car. He has a vague plan to drive across the state and get rid of the bags in a dumping site. I return to Annie Schwartz. What happens next?
Dahmer gets stopped by a police officer who says, what's going on? where are you going? What are you doing? But the master manipulator tells the police, no, you know what? I just have to get to the dump. I've got trash. I got to, And do we expect that officer is going to say, I wonder if he has a dead body in the car?
They asked me, what's this stuff? And I said, it's just garbage that I hadn't gotten around to drop off at the city dump earlier today. I thought they were going to look into them. They could smell them. Both of them.
What the police officer could never have known is that the nervous young man before him would go on to become one of the most depraved serial killers in American history. And right at that moment, he's within the officer's grasp. The officer gets Dahmer to walk in a straight line to test his sobriety. Surely, he'll check the trash bags as well.
Dahmer is serving 15 consecutive life sentences for the murders of 17 males.
The most prolific slayer in the history of the state of Wisconsin.
From 1978 to 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys. He cannibalized some of his victims, dismembered their bodies, and preyed on the vulnerable, becoming one of the most depraved serial killers in American history. But what is the real story of this most unlikely of killers? And could this ever happen again? I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Mind of a Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer. Episode 2, A Serial Killer is Born. It's 3 a.m., June 1978, and we're on a highway in Ohio where a driver has just been pulled over by police for swerving out of the lane. The driver is recent high school graduate Jeffrey Dahmer, and he's nervous. The police officer's curiosity is piqued by smelly garbage bags in the back seat. "What's this stuff?" the officer asks. "It's just garbage," Dahmer lies. Dahmer waits with bated breath. Is this it? Will he be caught? Inside the bags are the remains of his first victim, Stephen Hicks. The officer waves Dahmer on his way.
I couldn't believe it. I thought I was dreaming. So I went back home, and that was the first time.
Once home, he stuffs the dismembered body parts down a drainage pipe, where they'd remain untouched for 2.5 years. When Stephen Hicks fails to return home after the rock concert, his parents aren't initially too worried. He's 18 and he's known to stay out late. But after a day or so, their kind-natured young son's absence rings alarm bells. Panicked, they start calling local hospitals to see if he's been admitted. After several days of doing this with no success, the concerned family files a missing persons report with the Summit County Sheriff's Department. A detective is assigned to the case and retraces Hicks' 30-mile journey to the concert, but he turns up nothing. It's like he has simply vanished into thin air. The family put up a reward for information, but the days turn into weeks, and the weeks turn into months. The case file remains open. I turned to E. Michael McCann, who was Milwaukee's district attorney and would go on to be the lead prosecutor during Jeffrey Dahmer's trial.
I'm sure they hoped and prayed that their son, whom they had last seen in 1978, was still alive. It makes you almost cry. You know, hope springs eternal within the human breast, and I'm sure they were hoping he was still alive. As you know, he utterly disposed of the body. There was never a trace of him. They never knew what happened to him. He just disappeared off the face of the earth, your son, and to learn nothing of him for 13 years. That was one of the worst of Dahmer's savage habits. The people he killed, he completely disposed of their bodies. We had the pain he inflicted on people. My God, to steal your son, the savagery of the man.
There's something you need to know about the word true when it comes to true crime. There are often multiple truths at play, and every single person involved in a violent crime, whether a perpetrator, victim, witness, or professional working the case, has a unique perspective on what happened. These truths do not have to negate each other. They can coexist. I want you to keep this in mind when assessing the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, because often there are no easy answers to many of the questions we are presented. One such question is the impact that Dahmer's first encounter with the police had on him. To E. Michael McCann, the impact was troubling. Do you think it emboldened him?
Oh, it did, no question. And he got confident. That was his first one he got away with. Imagine getting, how cool you are. Here he is. This is his first killing, apparently. He's got the dead body and he got an officer flashing a light in there. Dahmer was cool. He didn't break down and say, oh my God.
Dr. Fred Berlin, who would go on to be a key witness for the defense, has a different take. He gets away with it. What do you think that did, if anything?
No, I think that was tragic, but I think that, given the nature of his disorder, that tragically this was going to go on until he either could say something to someone or be apprehended and stopped.
Despite the wreckage he has caused in someone else's life, Jeffrey Dahmer's life goes on. I speak with Annie Schwartz, the author of Monster, the true story of the Jeffrey Dahmer murders. He's had his first kill. He's continuing to drink heavily. What happens next?
So he goes to college. That is not working because he's drinking all the time. And so he's just not cutting it. His father convinces Jeffrey that if he joins the military service in some way, that may help him. So Dahmer ends up joining the army. And he ends up as a medic because that's what he's interested in. He ends up in Germany.
We're only 4 years after the Vietnam War, and the U.S. has stations all over the world. One of the most significant in terms of the geopolitics of the Cold War is in Germany. So that's where many young recruits are sent. One such recruit is Preston Davis.
Well, I come from a military background, so I basically felt that once I turned 17, it was my time to serve. Family tradition, so to speak.
What was the Army like?
At that time, they took high school dropouts because you could get your high school diploma in the service. You could join at 17, your parents had to sign. You can't just say, well, Michelle, I want to be a pilot. You have to qualify for certain jobs. So you take a test and it tells whether you're good in mechanics, science, etc. So my thing was, I wanted to be a medic and I wanted to go to Germany. That way, if I didn't like it, at least I saw something and I had a career field. And so that's basically how I joined the military.
You and Jeffrey Dahmer were stationed in Germany at the same time. Tell me your first impression of him.
Well, I got to Germany in June of 1977. Jeff got to Germany in July of 79. My first impression was he's smart, very quiet, very introverted.
Did he interact with people at all?
Not like most men that age interact, Michelle, to be respectful. Guys that age talked about, I had this girlfriend and blah, 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 that type of stuff. But he never talked about stuff like that. When he drank, he got very obnoxious, boastful, racist, that type of stuff. So he was just very verbally abusive, y'all ain't worth shit, y'all ain't, that type of stuff.
So he would say that to a group of people of mixed races? He would say racial slurs?
Yeah.
Was he drunk when that would happen?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, that must have infuriated these guys.
Well, I mean, it was a different time. I mean, you have to understand that we're talking 1977, 1979, and there was race wars going on in the military. And so one of the first things that they incorporated was race relations, was part of indoctrination, because you had people from Ohio, Arkansas, whatever, that never saw somebody black or white. And so, racism is not instinct, it's taught. There's two places that it doesn't matter what your race is, in the maternity ward and in the cemetery. And that's fact.
What kind of training did you get in the Army?
Well, medics, we're taught to save lives. So when you look at a CNA on the outside versus a medic on the inside, we're taught mass shootings, life-threatening injuries. So we're trained to do stuff that we're not allowed to do on the outside.
And it's my understanding that Jeffrey Dahmer was interested in all of this science stuff too. So I would imagine that he also sought out that particular training in the Army.
Well, actually, believe it or not, Jeff was supposed to be a military police officer. And he flunked out from drinking. Yes. And so what they should have done, they should have kicked him out. But you have to understand that Vietnam had ended 3, 4, 5 years ago, and they need soldiers. So they said, well, what do you want to do? So Jeff says, well, I guess I'll be a medic. And that's how he became a medic. Imagine if he had become a police officer. Imagine that.
Was he talking about killing people? Did he boast about that while he was actually in the Army?
He got drunk and he talked about he had killed, he didn't mention a name, but he had killed somebody in Ohio. And we're like, man, you ain't killed nobody. Who the heck would believe somebody that said they killed somebody prior to coming into the military?
So people just kind of ignored that.
Of course. Right. We just think you're embellishing, you know?
Can you share your experience with Jeffrey Dahmer as we've come to know him?
Jeff got there in July of '79, and we were scheduled to go on a field exercise in October. And my boss said, train a new guy, and when you come back, I'll put you up for sergeant. So we're out in Belgium. And of course, he didn't have a license. So I'm doing all the driving. And the last 3 or 4 days of the exercise, our vehicle broke down. So that's how he had access to me. You have to understand that a company consists of 150 soldiers. A battalion consists of maybe 600 soldiers. You have 4 medics per company. So if I'm on an exercise and I'm with Jeff, we got 150 soldiers that we're medically responsible for. That's a lot of people. And they're all over Belgium. And so the only way you really can communicate is via radio. Now, you didn't have internet, you didn't have cell phone, you didn't have none of that. So it's all done through radio, through the vehicles. So when we broke down, we were towed to the train station. And that's where we were isolated, and that's when my assault happened. I was drugged and assaulted. You know, medics, we had access to all type of medications or narcotics. And so something was put in my food or drink, and I lost time. I mean, I woke up, I didn't realize what the hell happened.
So at some point, you're stranded after the breakdown for those few days, and he attacks you. How did you come to realize that that had happened to you?
I didn't realize what happened to me until 2009. And then I started having nightmares, and I guess God started showing me little bits and pieces. And I went through my medical records, and I said, damn, I had hemorrhoids this year. Started putting it all together. But, you know, I went through very, very, very bad survivor's guilt because I basically blame myself because if I had only remembered, but I didn't remember, you know.
Preston's friend, Billy Capshaw, says he was also assaulted by Jeffrey Dahmer during his time in the Army. And when Preston tells his wife about their shared experiences, she calls Billy.
She asked him, how could he not remember? And Billy says, hey, it's part of trauma. I'll go on the record for the first time. You know, I truly believe that my wife knowing what happened to me has affected my marriage. This is not easy. This ain't no badge of honor. It's not a badge of honor at all.
Jeffrey Dahmer has been connected to a series of murders in Germany while he was serving. Could you share your thoughts on that?
In November, Thanksgiving of '79, I was at a dinner at a soldier's house. There's like probably 8 of us. And Jeff and I got in an argument, and I kicked him out into a blizzard. He came back. He had blood on his hands. I believe they found a female within proximity murdered. So Billy and I surmised that Jeff murdered her. Now, we can't prove it, but that's what I believe. You know, people need to know that there's demons walking amongst us. And They look just like you and I. And you could have one living right next door to you and not even know it.
Preston is not alone in linking Jeffrey Dahmer to the murders in Germany, but I'm not sure it fits with the rest of the trajectory. I want some other perspectives. Dr. Fred Berlin.
Well, they did investigate that very carefully, and so I don't think so. No evidence was found that during that hiatus, which included his time in Germany, that there's no evidence at all that he committed a killing in that time period.
That's kind of the position I had taken, too. I'm a relative neophyte when it comes to Jeffrey Dahmer, but it just doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense. Plus, they're investigating girls, and Dahmer doesn't kill girls. Annie Schwartz has a similar take.
I have spoken to investigators that worked a number of murders that happened while Dahmer was stationed in Germany. One of the things that happens when you discover a serial killer is every law enforcement officer who ever worked in any place that serial killer ever was looks at any unsolved murders and says, is this one we can put here? I don't just believe it because Dahmer said it. Dahmer says he did not. He did not kill anyone when he was stationed in Germany. But, he wasn't a serial killer yet, I guess I would say. He had done this one murder. It was weighing on him, just made him drink more. Dahmer joining the military was like the last salvo, right? The last attempt to try and live a normal life. And he just couldn't do it. Just couldn't do it. And he's discharged.
Eventually, unsurprisingly, it's Dahmer's drinking that ends his military career. His dependency becomes so severe that he's reportedly restricted to his room and only allowed to leave with an escort.
I was discharged 6 months early from the service for drinking too much. I didn't want to be discharged early, but they did. I didn't want to go home right away because I didn't feel comfortable explaining to my folks why I was out 6 months early. So I decided that Miami, Florida would be a nice, warm place to go.
After a few months in Florida, Jeffrey Dahmer swallows his pride and returns home to Bath, Ohio. Unbeknownst to his father, the remains of Stephen Hicks have been hidden in the drainpipe ever since he left. Annie Schwartz.
He goes into the army and comes out and comes back to the house and gets the bags. That's when he pulverizes the bones and scatters them across the property. Now, there were people that said, well, he scattered the remains all over the woods so that he could keep Stephen Hicks with him. I don't buy that because I don't think he was in that place yet, mentally. Always got to get rid of the body. It's utility. It's utility and not, I want to keep him close to me.
I agree. So he's still drinking. He's still troubled. What happens next?
So Lionel Dahmer, Dahmer's father, sends him to Milwaukee because he's screwed up. He's like, I don't know what to do anymore. And Jeffrey's troubled and, frankly, a little dark. So we're going to, ship him off to Grandma in Milwaukee.
And Dahmer seems to have a genuine bond with his grandmother, doesn't he?
She's his grandma.
You're right. She loves him.
I think she was the one person in his life that truly, truly loved him. And I think he truly, truly recognized that she did.
And it seems like he loved her, too, in whatever way Dahmer can love. To Lionel Dahmer, the grandmother's house in West Allis, Wisconsin seems like the best possible solution. And to begin with, everything seemed to be going well. Perhaps it would be a fresh start for his troubled eldest son.
He took care of my mother's dog. Loved that little dog that she had. Went to church with her. Took her various places. And he would drive sometimes, and she would drive other times. And they looked after each other very well. I think that was positive.
But things were about to change.
I arrested Mr. Dahmer in 1981 on a disorderly conduct charge. Apparently he had been asked to leave the premises because of a state of intoxication and refused to do so.
One of the things we often hear said about Jeffrey Dahmer is how after the murder of Stephen Hicks, he tried to resist his urges to kill for 9 years. And I believe this to be true. But it paints a far too simplistic impression of this period of his life where he regularly comes into contact with law enforcement, often for very bizarre incidents. From being reprimanded for threatening to kill a female bartender while inebriated and arrested for being drunk and disorderly, to altogether more disturbing episodes. One such incident was at the Wisconsin State Fair in 1982. I speak to Dr. Fred Berlin. Jeffrey Dahmer was apprehended for exposing himself in front of children at the Wisconsin State Fair. How does that particular lewd behavior in public tally with the other aspects of his character? Because everything else we'd seen that he had done was under the cover of night, in privacy, and this was a little different.
Yeah, this was not part of his pattern. This was not what the criminal justice system would call part of his MO. I think he was just extremely intoxicated in that instance, and just a one-time aberrant behavior. I mean, I've seen other cases over the years of people that get drunk and they moon the crowd or they expose themselves. So that was an aberration. It was never repeated, and I don't think means much more than he was drunk at that point and did something foolish. Others have done that. I don't think that was tied into the necrophilia or any other aspect of his behavior.
But this is not an isolated case. On another occasion, he's arrested for masturbating in front of young boys. He tells the police that he was urinating, but later confesses the truth.
In West Dallas, there was some lewd and lascivious behavior in a park that I was involved with for about a year. But there was no assault on any children or anything. It was just masturbation.
It's an interesting use of the word just there. Psychologists see exposure as a form of sadism, whereby the perpetrator deliberately seeks to upset and offend the public. It's troubling that he is doing that in front of young children. He is charged with lewd behavior and is sentenced to a year's probation, a condition of which is to undergo psychological counseling. Even at this stage, alarm bells are being raised. One psychologist warns that, quote, his deviant behavior will at least continue in some form, if not be exacerbated. His defenses will probably be inadequate, and he could gravitate toward further substance abuse with possible subsequent increased masochism or sadistic tendencies and behaviors. In tandem, he's unnerved his grandmother by stealing a male mannequin, which he hides in the basement. And unknown to anyone else, he has also been trawling obituaries to try to find an already dead young man, even making an unsuccessful attempt at grave robbing. All of this could be seen as a man resisting his most deadly of urges, but it shouldn't be ignored. It is a critical period in his trajectory. While living with his grandmother in West Allis, Jeffrey Dahmer enters the gay social scene in Milwaukee, and it is in the bathhouses that we see the first evidence that Jeffrey Dahmer's interest in submissive male bodies has not disappeared. Michael Dakash is a historian of Wisconsin's LGBTQ history, and although he was much younger, he was on the social scene during the years that Jeffrey Dahmer was operating. Can you describe for us the bathhouses in Milwaukee at the time?
So while at my tender young age I could get into bars, I could not get into bathhouses because they did require IDs and they were pretty strict about it. And I think I would have been probably afraid of them at the time. But I have, part of the History Project, done a lot of research on them. Milwaukee's first opened in the early 70s. It was called Club Finlandia, and it was in a residential neighborhood, which was kind of shocking. It had like a swimming pool and hot tubs and all the different things you would imagine a bathhouse to have. But it was really, really popular. The bathhouse was really seen as an extension of gay identity at the time. It was really a cornerstone of living a liberated, free gay life. It was a community center. It was a dating center. It was a very anonymous place. So to go there was even more discreet than going to a bar, but to find a connection there was even less likely. You know, that was a space that was meant for kind of fleeting, transient moments, not really meant to be a place where you would find a date that you would go home with. Jeffrey Dahmer was certainly known to be a patron of the club baths.
But Dahmer is not using the bathhouses like everyone else. The anonymous nature of the space allows him to play out his fantasies, albeit in a limited fashion. The sexual excitement of a dead male body has never left him. Dennis Murphy would later be a lead detective on the Jeffrey Dahmer case.
You'd go to the bathhouses and use halcyon chopped up in a glass, make a drink, and have sex with people in the bathhouses until he got caught. He overdosed one of the people that he met, and he called an ambulance, and they kicked him out of the bathhouses. So after he got kicked out, he started going to the gay bars more and approaching people on the street, asking if they would pose for him for money.
With the bathhouses no longer an option for Jeffrey Dahmer to find victims, he starts staying in hotels in Milwaukee while he frequents bars. On November 20th, 1987, he meets a young man named Stephen Toomey. Toomey is a short-order cook who has always had an interest in art. Dahmer invites him back to the hotel. Dr. Fred Berlin.
He convinced Stephen to come with him to the Ambassador Hotel, and that had been done in a purely consensual way. There's no evidence that Mr. Dahmer had intended to kill Stephen because the records show that Mr. Dahmer signed into the hotel for 1 day. Mr. Dahmer apparently was going to try to slip a drug called halcyon into Stephen's drink so that Stephen would fall asleep. He would be able to have sex with him, and this would act as a kind of a surrogate activity to help him not have this desire to kill. What likely happens is that he accidentally took some of that laced drink himself.
So Dahmer could have accidentally drugged himself, and then he blacks out and wakes up the next morning with bloodied hands and a dead body next to him.
Now, we know that he hadn't planned it ahead of time is because he'd signed in for 1 day. He then goes down and signs in for a 2nd day because his body there and he needs some time to get rid of it.
Jeffrey Dahmer gets himself a suitcase and packs Stephen Toomey's dead body into it, taking it back with him in a cab to his grandmother's house.
I take the suitcase, put it in the fruit cellar, and leave it there for about a week. It was November, cold. When my grandma goes to church for a couple of hours, I go down and get it, take a knife, deflesh the body, triple bag the flesh, wrap the skeleton up in an old bed sheet, smash it up with a sledgehammer, and throw it all out with the trash on Monday morning.
That was, for lack of a better word, an epiphany in Mr. Dahmer's life. He had tried for years to fight this thing, to not give in to these cravings, to not take another human life. And that's where his thinking began to become really disturbed, like a religious conversion in reverse. Maybe this is what I'm meant to do in life. Maybe, as some people think, there's a God who has a plan for them. There's some devil, and that devil has a plan for me. He began getting ideas like, if I build a temple out of the sacred remains of the people whose lives I've taken, the devil will reveal himself. He started reading about things like incantations and rituals and whether somehow this would be tied into to devil work and so on. Again, he wasn't saying the devil made me do it, but he was trying to understand, and it was just all downhill from that point on. He stopped fighting the urges. He gave in to them. He started to believe that maybe this is the way it's meant to be. and eventually became, in my mind, a killing machine completely out of control.
He tries to preserve Toomey's skull, but it becomes brittle, so he pulverizes that too. The next victim comes several weeks later when he lures back to his grandmother's house a 14-year-old boy named James Dockstader. Dahmer drugs and strangles the boy before destroying his body with a sledgehammer.
Dahmer was experimenting. He was trying to figure out how is he going to act out on these desires, right? How is he going to do this? And he ends up, looking for men. He brings men back to Grandma's house and has sex with them and doesn't kill them. Jeffrey Dahmer did not kill everyone he had sex with.
One of Dahmer's first known victims was 25-year-old Richard Guerrero, who disappeared in 1988.
It's March 1988, and Jeffrey Dahmer is at the Phoenix Bar in Milwaukee when he meets 25-year-old Richard Guerrero. He offers Guerrero $50 for sex, and the pair go back to Dahmer's grandmother's house. Dahmer's use of sleeping pills has become ubiquitous. While many other aspects of his MO are still developing, drugging his victims is now a hallmark of this killer's behavior. Guerrero falls unconscious and is murdered. He is victim number 4.
From then on, it was a craving, a hunger. I just kept doing it, and doing it. Whenever the opportunity presented itself. It was an incessant and never-ending desire to have someone.
By now, Jeffrey Dahmer's activities in the basement are causing his grandmother concern. Lyle Dahmer remembers.
My mother noticed also some strange smells in the house, and we had no idea at the time what that was. Jeff said that he had an animal down there. I said, "What were you doing with that?" I cannot remember what he said, but he minimized the importance of it. That's as much as I can remember.
Annie, I don't know why, but one of the most disturbing aspects of these early murders is that he's doing it right under his grandmother's nose, in her house, in her basement.
It wouldn't have occurred to his grandmother that he was like having sex with people in the basement. Certainly didn't occur to her that, he was killing people in the basement. But she didn't love it that he was bringing men home. Eventually she was like, okay, he's bringing men home. This is not okay.
Then, in April, Jeffrey Dahmer lures another man to his grandmother's basement, intending to kill him. This time, his victim is Ronald Flowers, who's in Milwaukee visiting for the night. Dahmer begins to brew him a cup of coffee laced with drugs. But the pair is disturbed by Dahmer's grandmother, who has heard voices. She calls, "Is that you?" Dahmer replies, but makes no mention of his guest. Now that his grandmother has heard someone else in the house, Jeffrey Dahmer is forced to change his plans. There is a fight, and Dahmer sexually assaults Flowers, but somehow Flowers, now drugged, still finds his way to the hospital. When he wakes, disoriented and hurt with ligature marks on his neck, he reports the crime to police, telling them that he's been attacked, sexually assaulted, drugged, and robbed. The police go to Dahmer's grandmother's home and leave him a note. Dahmer makes an appointment to speak with the police, where he proceeds to tell the officer that the pair are simply in a relationship. And not for the first nor the last time, the police do not pursue legitimate claims against Jeffrey Dahmer. This latest incident with one of his late-night guests makes the situation at his grandmother's house untenable.
There was pressure from my grandma and dad. Word had gotten out about my late-night activities. So they thought it would be better to just move out.
Dahmer is serving 15 consecutive life sentences for the murders of 17 males.
The most prolific slayer in the history of the state of Wisconsin.
From 1978 to 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys. He cannibalized some of his victims, dismembered their bodies, and preyed on the vulnerable, becoming one of the most depraved serial killers in American history. But what is the real story of this most unlikely of killers? And could this ever happen again? I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Mind of a Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer. Episode 3, Dahmer and the Chocolate Factory. It's mid-afternoon, September 1988, and Jeffrey Dahmer lies in wait near a local school on 25th Street, Milwaukee. He approaches a young East Asian immigrant who attends the Milwaukee School of Arts and asks if he'd like $50 to pose for some pictures. Dahmer tells the boy he has a new camera and would like to try it out. This is a world with an unsteady economy, poverty, and widespread racial tensions. It's the perfect time and place for a killer with an appetite for young men and boys of color to operate. And $50 is no small sum. The boy agrees. Back at Dahmer's new apartment in a rundown part of town, the boy is given a cup of coffee laced with sleeping pills. Dahmer watches as his victim drinks and insists the boy take off his clothes for the pictures. He then sexually assaults the minor, but before the drugs have had time to take hold, the boy, sensing he's in danger, makes his excuses and leaves. By the time the boy reaches home, the sleeping pills have made him confused, exhausted, and unable to stand. He falls unconscious and is taken to the hospital. He's diagnosed with a drug overdose. The police are called.
Never went after children. My interest was in older adults of bar age, and all of them that I met I thought were bar age.
It doesn't take long for police to figure out where the boy has been attacked, and they manage to locate Jeffrey Dahmer's place of work. For the past 4 years, he's been working night shifts at a chocolate factory. The work is monotonous, but it gives Dahmer the income he needs to feed his drinking habit. At work, he is quiet, private, and does not socialize. It is here that police find him. In front of his colleagues, he is cuffed and arrested for second-degree sexual assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes. He's taken straight to jail. Dahmer's father, Lionel, spoke with the Mind of Monster team in 2020 about the arrest.
I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe that he would do that. It was hard to believe, but I had to because I was told that it was true. It was terribly difficult. I just couldn't really deal with it at that point. It was just devastating. It affected me very greatly. I did question him about it. What are you doing? What exactly did you think you were doing? Or why did you do it? No answer, no good answer at all. Jeff just would say something obtuse like, just wanted to do it or something, just a non-answer.
Whatever he might insist in his own testimony, the facts do not lie. Jeffrey Dahmer is not only a murderer, but he's also a pedophile. And he has a track record in crimes involving minors. From exposing himself at the Wisconsin State Fair in 1982 to masturbating in front of 2 12-year-olds in 1986. We should not forget that his third victim was just 14 years old. Back in jail, aside from having some of his criminal activities revealed, there's a pressing concern for Jeffrey Dahmer. His arrest was sudden and unexpected, and gave him no time to hide the incriminating evidence within his new apartment. Along with Polaroid pictures of himself and the boy, he also has his fourth victim's skull. The detectives find the pictures, but miss the skull.
They searched my apartment. I have an apartment on 24th Street, and they looked. They just didn't pull a towel up. That's why they didn't see the skull.
It's the second occasion police are in breathing distance of Jeffrey Dahmer's murder victims. Dahmer is released on bail after a week, and his family hires a lawyer, Gerald Boyle, to represent him. While awaiting trial for the molestation of the boy, he's put through a series of psychological assessments. E. Michael McCann was Milwaukee's district attorney at the time. After the arrest, but before his trial, Dahmer undergoes a series of psychological assessments with Dr. Lodel and Dr. Goldfarb. And they state, quote, he's in need of long-term psychological treatment, a seriously disturbed young man, and that he, quote, must be considered impulsive and dangerous. What do you make of that?
He was candid with Dr. Lodel, saying he's alienated and so on. If he opened up completely with him, he'd know his life would be over. He'd already killed 3 or 4 people. But if he had been perfectly candid with Dahmer, knew that'd be the end of his life. It did seem that he wanted help, and the doctor recognized it. But then the second doctor saw him, and he wouldn't cooperate with Goldfarb at all. Goldfarb said his attitude has changed. He won't answer monosyllabic answers. He won't cooperate. Even between Lodel and Goldfarb, the 2 psychiatrists, his attitude had changed. I think he thought about it and said, hell, I can't tell the truth because I'm done. I'll go to jail forever. I've already killed 3 or 4 men.
That's the big quandary of Jeffrey Dahmer. He both asks for help, knows he needs the help, but is still self-protective enough to not risk his freedom for it.
He never committed crimes in front of anybody because he'd go to jail. He thought about the risk. Is it worth the price? Is it worth the sexual desire of the risk? And he didn't want to take the risk.
It was calculating.
He went from 78 to 87 without a slaying. Of course, that shows control, too.
On January 30th, 1989, the case goes to trial. Jeffrey Dahmer pleads guilty to the assault of a child, but claims he didn't know the drug was in the drink. The court finds him guilty. His sentencing is scheduled for May 1989. Until then, he's a free man.
I was interested in finding the type. The Chippendale type, good-looking swimmers type build, gymnast type build. And it was not a case of hating them, it was just, it was the only way I knew of to keep them there and keep them with me. It gave me a sense of total control and increased the sexual thrill, I guess, knowing that I had total control of them and that I could do with them as I wished. That was the motivation.
It's March 25th, 1989, 2 months after Dahmer has been found guilty of assaulting a minor and 2 months before he is due to be sentenced. It's nighttime, and 3 men congregate outside popular gay bar Le Cage, 2 of whom, Anthony Sears and Jeffrey Dahmer, seem to have made a connection. So the third agrees to drop them off at Dahmer's place. Sears is a 24-year-old aspiring model who works as a manager at a restaurant in Milwaukee. They drive to West Allis, but rather than stop at the house Dahmer shares with his grandmother, Dahmer insists he and Sears get dropped off a few blocks away, on the corner of 56th Street and Lincoln in West Allis. The pair walk the rest of the way. In a 1991 interview, a cousin of Tony Sears describes his older relation.
Tony was always outgoing. He's sociable and friendly, and he's real goofy. He's the type of person that he said he would tell you to live, don't rush life.
Dennis Murphy was a detective within the Milwaukee police at the time of the murders. Can you tell me about Anthony Sears?
Anthony Sears met Dahmer at the Le Cage gay bar. He walked him to Grandma's house, and while there, he killed him. Then he disposed of the body. He painted his scalp and genitals, and he took that to work with him in his lunchbox, just to keep it near him.
It doesn't take long for concerns to be raised. He's reported missing by a friend on March 29th, and his family tries to track him down. E. Michael McCann. Anthony, Tony Sears, what were your thoughts on that murder?
We only know what happened from what Dahmer told us. His family was able to locate that he left with Dahmer, left the tavern, whatever it was. They were able to locate who drove him out. And Dahmer, this is how clever he was. He didn't drive to his house. Whenever he took a cab, it was always blocks away. Again, this is part of why he wasn't insane. The guy said, well, this is where I dropped him off. It was a corner, a busy corner. Where do you go from there? Again, that was the wisdom, the savagery of Jeffrey Dahmer. So what we know later was blocks away from Dahmer's house. That's the thing that sticks out in my mind about Sears. His family loved him so much. These guys were loved. They lost, I mean, you can imagine, some of them were fathers, brothers. That heartbreak for these families. And then the total disappearance. What happened to my son? He's gone. He's disappeared. And Tony disappeared.
Anthony Sears' family files a missing persons report with the police, and theirs is not the only one. After making investigations on their own, the family of Stephen Toomey, Dahmer's second victim, files a report 3 months after he was last known to have been seen. Within days of his disappearance, the family of Dahmer's fourth victim, Richard Guerrero, files a report too. Along with the investigation in Ohio into Stephen Hicks, there are now 4 missing persons reports filed in Milwaukee, but they aren't being linked. With full knowledge that he has Anthony Sears' head in his locker at work, Jeffrey Dahmer appears in court for his sentencing for sexually assaulting a minor. The court has heard the warnings of the psychologist that he's disturbed and must be considered impulsive and dangerous. The sentencing comes in. A year in prison and 5 years probation. During the prison term, however, he'll be allowed out on work release. I return to Annie Schwartz.
How do you tell as a law enforcement person, you have an offense in a bubble, right? What is indicating to you in a crowded court system? So remember that when we're talking about the 1980s, we're talking about the cocaine as an epidemic, right? We're talking about record years for homicides in cities all over the country. This is the backdrop for our justice system at that time. In the course of talking about this case, when we talk about the near misses, or we talk about the, wow, he could have been, if we made the pin map, he could have been caught here, he could have been caught here. Yes, he could have, in all of the contacts he had with law enforcement. And we can say that comfortably because now we can go back 30-something years, right? And we can say, wow, how did they not know that? Or wasn't that a red flag for them? The Jeffrey Dahmer case and the times that he was able to evade law enforcement are not unlike the cases that we see now when we hear about a massacre or we hear about a mass shooting. Now have a suspect and we go back and we see the judge that gave them probation instead of prison time. All of those things. It is hindsight. It is not having the magic 8 ball. Evading law enforcement is why it takes so long to find serial killers, because they're really good at it.
While in prison, in an effort to have his sentence decreased, Jeffrey Dahmer writes to the judge expressing contrition for the assault on a minor, but not giving the slightest hint that there might have been even a darker story behind the attack.
Sir, I have always believed that a man should be willing to assume responsibility for the mistakes that he makes in life. What I did was deplorable. The world has enough misery in it without my adding more to it.
Unknown to Dahmer, as his release date gets closer, his father Lionel writes to the judge begging for help. Here, he reads out extracts from his letter to Judge William Gardner.
My biggest concern, as Jeff is released the first part of this month, is that the same situation may ensue. Every incident, including the most recent conviction for sex offense, has been associated with and initiated by alcohol in Jeff's case. I sincerely hope that you might intervene in some way to help my son, who I love very much and for whom I want a better life. I think it is best to ensure to my relationship with Jeff that no one tell him of my efforts towards effective treatment. I do feel, though, that this may be our last chance to initiate something lasting and that you can hold the key. Sincerely, yours, Lionel Dahmer.
Reflecting on the impact of the letter, Lionel had the following to say.
I felt like this was the last chance that this could help Jeff, and I wanted to write to Judge Gardner to please do something now. Please help my son. They did not do anything. Nothing.
Jeffrey Dahmer is released after serving 10 months. After a short time back with his grandmother, he moves into a new apartment, apartment 213, in a complex called the Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street in Milwaukee. He takes his collection of body parts with him, as well as a copy of Return of the Jedi, a film he's become obsessed with, identifying with the villain Emperor Palpatine so much that he starts wearing yellow contact lenses to channel the same kind of evil. Vernell Bass is the author of Across the Hall, and he was also a resident at the complex. What were the Oxford Apartments and the surrounding neighborhood like?
The Oxford Apartments, the building itself was the most unique building in the area. And when I say unique, I mean by it was clean, and the security was very well kept. And the surrounding buildings, they were kind of run down. People, low-income people, drug dealing, prostitution. You go on, you could just walk down the street and you would find bags of dope on the sidewalk, from where somebody had to run from the police and they had to throw it. Bags of crack on the ground. It was that bad.
When did you first notice or meet Jeffrey Dahmer?
When I first noticed him, going in and out of this apartment to realize that he was living across the hall from me, my first impression of him was that, well, first of all, he was clean cut, and he wasn't a bad-looking guy. And whenever I spoke to him, he would always give me a smile and return my greeting. And I think that after maybe a couple of weeks, our first conversation may have been with him going in his apartment or coming out. We were standing at each other's doors, and we started talking, where I found out where he worked, and then I told him about my job, and then I think that's when he first introduced himself to me as Jeff. He wasn't a dressy type fella. He'd wear jeans and maybe a flannel shirt and a jacket, with his shirt open, he was well cut, well groomed, with maybe loafers. You never saw him hanging out in front of the building talking to people or anything like that. Nothing like that.
Did he seem unusual to any of the people around him?
Okay, well, first of all, he was the only white guy in the building, so of course he was weird. Most black people think a guy being of his nature, yeah, we see that as being weird. But not a weirdo, just weird, keeping to himself. But then again, it would be more like he would isolate himself to protect himself. He was robbed twice.
The old desires have not gone away, and Dahmer is desperate for a new male body to possess. I want to get to the bottom of his motivation because the picture is complex. Were these desires beyond his control? I speak to psychiatrist Dr. Fred Berlin, who would go on to be a witness for the defense.
God or nature put the sex drive into each and every one of us for a very important reason. That's preservation of the human race. If I don't eat, I die. If we all stopped having sex, the human race would disappear. So when that powerful biologically based drive that recurrently wants to be satisfied gets misdirected, for example, towards dead bodies, it still recurrently wants to be satisfied, and it shouldn't take a mental health expert to appreciate how problematic that can be. Imagine if somebody told me I have to go through life never having sex with a woman. That would be extremely difficult. Unfortunately, there's no reason for anyone to say that. But in Mr. Dahmer's case, we're telling him he can never in his life even once have sex with the only kind of partner that he desires having sex with. That is an extremely difficult thing for anybody to do, given what the sex drive is all about.
What Dr. Fred Berlin describes here sounds like a kind of sexual death sentence. E. Michael McCann would go on to be the prosecuting attorney, and he highlights paraphilia. And by paraphilia, I mean abnormal, often criminal sexual desires, to put forward a different argument.
There's a lot of men who may want to do paraphilias. They want to get involved with the lady next door. The desire can be very strong. Some act on it foolishly, but that's desire. You don't have compulsion for sex. Who feels, oh, I gotta have sex, I don't want to, but I gotta have sex. I've never met such a man that speaks that way. As you know, in the psychiatric manuals, DSM-3 and 4, they draw a distinction between compulsions and desires. Certain crimes are compulsions, some are not. Paraphilia is sex desire, gambling, drinking too much. Those are not compulsions. They may be referred to that way. They're desires. You enjoy doing it. Compulsions are where people don't enjoy doing it. The hand washer, the person with the security desire has to keep locking the doors. They don't enjoy that.
No, it's debilitating.
Dahmer didn't have compulsions. He had desires. And that is a critical distinction between the paraphilia and what would ordinarily be. The use of the term compulsions is obviously very self-serving because he was going to argue that he didn't do it freely. But every one of those murders, there was no compulsion. Nobody told him to do it. No, he wanted to do it. There was no push, oh my God, I don't feel safe unless I do it. I've got to wash my hands again. Nothing like that at all. He wanted to go out, grab somebody, drug them, sex with them for several hours, and kill them. That was his desire.
The psychology of this is fascinating. Jeffrey Dahmer was diagnosed with paraphilic disorder, which is a diagnosis given to individuals whose paraphilic behaviors escalate to a level that causes personal distress and/or harm to others. The key distinction here is that paraphilia is the behavior, and paraphilic disorder is a disorder resulting from the behavior becoming detrimental to the self or to others. While important from a psychological standpoint, the question of whether Jeffrey Dahmer's actions were within or beyond his control is of little consequence to those whose lives he's taking, and he's only just getting started. Within weeks of his release, Dahmer is on the hunt again. By May 20th, 1990, he finds Raymond Smith, who goes by the names Cash D and Ricky Beeks. Dahmer takes Smith to his new apartment, careful to use the back entrance so as to not arouse suspicion. As is Dahmer's way, he drugs Smith, then strangles him to death before dismembering his body and engaging in necrophilia. But he does something else with Smith, too.
That would be Rick Beeks. His nickname was Cash. He had it tattooed on his chest. He was around 30 years old. He was working the bars and stuff, male prostitute. That was the first time with the heart.
So, Fred, Dahmer begins to cannibalize his victims. What is going through his mind at this point?
Mr. Dahmer began to engage in cannibalism well into the series of killings after he had kind of given up on being able to fight all of this. And at that point, he was starting to get rather bizarre ideas. And one of them was that if he ingested parts of the people he killed, that somehow they would keep him as they would be companions. They would live on through him. So a very disturbed way of thinking. But the cannibalism was his way of wanting to stay close to them and having a sense they would live on through him.
Over the summer of 1990, Dahmer claims 3 more victims: Edward Smith, 28, Ernest Miller, 22, and David C. Thomas, 23. Does anyone realize there is a serial killer in town? Michael Takash is the director of the Wisconsin LGBTQ History Project and was on the gay scene at the time. Going back to the bars in Milwaukee, would it have been easy for a predator to operate in a place like that?
Absolutely. And sadly, it was all due to the prevalence of homophobia at the time. I mean, people lived very separate lives. And although Milwaukee was really on the forefront of gay rights going all the way back to 1961, when one of the first LGBT uprisings in the nation occurred in downtown Milwaukee, people might never know someone's real name. They just know the name that they were given. It was almost like theater of a way. The way that people conducted themselves in gay bars, they kind of took on a different personality. They took on another persona. They had different names and maybe different backstories. But at the same time that all that was happening, the other thing was that everyone was very transient. You might meet somebody and like you would talk to them and like have conversations with them, and then you wouldn't see them again. And you would say, oh, whatever happened to that person? And, like, they'll disappear for months, then they'll show up for, you know, as if nothing had ever happened. And that was just kind of the way that a destabilized, marginalized community operated. But because of that transience, that impermanence, that anonymity, that secrecy, it lent itself to people doing things that maybe they wouldn't share in their daylight life. You couldn't tell people where you were or what you were doing, or in some cases, who you really were.
It's good for us to bring people back to the time and what it was like for people and how somebody could go missing without being reported in that community, especially if you don't even know the person's name.
Well, that's exactly right. When people did start going missing, the first rumblings of this were just, you know, people asking, have you seen so-and-so? And people would be like, no, you know, that person hasn't been seen or heard from a while. It got even more spooky as more and more people seemed to be missing all at once. But at the same time, I mean, this is when the AIDS epidemic hit critical mass in Wisconsin. In the 4 years where Dahmer was most active, in which he claimed all but one of his victims. So there was this rapid fire of loss that was happening, and it was almost impossible for people to keep up with. There was just this great disappearing happening, and you couldn't really tell where somebody was unless somebody told you. If somebody went missing, it was now, not that they fell in love, found a job, moved back home. It was because they died.
That sounds so dramatic.
You know, when people ask, how did people not know? How did people not know that there was a serial killer at work? How did people not suspect that something was happening that might be tragic or violent? No one could have possibly anticipated something like Jeffrey Dahmer. No one could have possibly have seen that level of inhumanity coming, no matter how dark their mind was, no matter how dystopian or misanthropic. Nobody could have seen that coming.
Tragically, there would be much more loss to come.
Dahmer is serving 15 consecutive life sentences for the murders of 17 males.
The most prolific slayer in the history of the state of Wisconsin.
From 1978 to 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys. He cannibalized some of his victims, dismembered their bodies, and preyed on the vulnerable, becoming one of the most depraved serial killers in American history. But what is the real story of this most unlikely of killers? And could this ever happen again? I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Mind of a Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer. Episode 4, House of Horrors. It's 1991, and Jeffrey Dahmer is approaching his 31st birthday. He lives a solitary life, working a menial job in a chocolate factory and living by himself in a simple apartment in a rundown part of town. He keeps to himself and has little contact with anyone in a meaningful way. None of this is an accident. Living in a crime-ridden part of the city will enable him to go unnoticed. In apartment 213, he can finally fully live out his ultimate fantasies. Here, he will be able to control every aspect of his secret activity, the killing of young men and boys. For this to work, there is one thing he needs to ensure: that he chooses his victims wisely. Annie Schwartz is the author of Monster, the true story of the Jeffrey Dahmer murders.
Dahmer was very purposeful, and he has confessed to this. He was very purposeful in who he chose as his victims.
It never ceases to disturb me when I hear about that.
So I always have to say this when I'm discussing this case, that this is not my opinion. This is an observation of what it was like to be in this city at that time. So you go to the police and you say, I want to file a missing persons report because my son, who is gay, I haven't seen him. I mean, we haven't talked in a couple of months, but it's really starting to get to be a long time, and I think there's something amiss. They had to know you have to understand what it was like to report that back in the 80s and 90s. What was it like to go to the police with that crime? So then the police are going to investigate it. The police go to the bathhouses, right? They start talking to people because apparently people were getting drugged at the bathhouses. But when the police go to investigate, what are they going to investigate? Who are the witnesses? Who are they going to talk to? Oh God, are you going to tell my parents? Are you going to tell my family? Are you going to tell my employer? I don't need my name on a police report someplace. It's the reason that people who are addicted to drugs, people who are prostitutes, people who live in any kind of disenfranchised community make an ideal victim because the police, typically, life has changed now, but typically it's kind of you haven't talked to your son in like 4 weeks, but all of a sudden now that it's 8 weeks, you think that something's wrong, or now imagine that they don't even know that their loved one has a secret life. Well, where should we start to look for him? I don't know.
Another important factor is the gender of his victims. Serial killers overwhelmingly murder women. To have a serial killer preying on men and boys is rare. E. Michael McCann was Milwaukee's district attorney at the time. He explains.
We did not know in Milwaukee that we had a serial male slayer on the loose. That was not known. So many young men just take off. They just get angry with their boss, a fight with their girlfriend, broke up with their family, just take off. So that I'm told the police don't invest much resources in those men because so often they come back and there isn't much, it'd be a waste of time. With children or women, it's quite different. They take that very seriously. If a woman disappears, a young woman, the presumption is it's foul play and resources are committed immediately. The same with children, of course. But with young men, whether they've changed that or not, I can't tell you. With young men, the experience is so many of them come back, leave in anger, come back, that it's improvident to expend substantial police resources looking up for disappeared young men.
All of this works in Jeffrey Dahmer's favor. He's already murdered 10 people, the most recent being an 18-year-old named Curtis Strader, and law enforcement hasn't even noticed. His next victim would be 19-year-old Earl Lindsay. Rita, I would love it if you could tell me a little bit more about your brother Earl. What are your memories of your brother?
All of them. I have all the memories of him because he had just turned 19. I remember the day he was born to the day he left here. He was very outgoing, outspoken, fearless. You get him, he'll get you back. One of those type of people. Play pranks on you. He tried to sing, but he couldn't. Got in some trouble.
What was his favorite trouble to get into?
Sneaking, doing things he didn't have any business doing. And thought it was so funny. He just thought that kind of stuff was hilarious. Well, he played drums too in church, believe it or not. And he loved to eat caramel candies, those caramel chews.
Which number in the family was he?
He was the last. He was number 6 and I was number 1.
Oh, you were like a mom to him.
The first and the last. Yes. Oh, yes. Always respected me. Had any problems with the other siblings, he would come and tell me. I think he found comfort in me. He could confide in me. He respected me, and I treated him not just like a brother, but a son and a mother, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same story that I had always told. It never changed. I wasn't living in Milwaukee at that time. He had just left my house when I was living in Cleveland, Ohio. He had gotten into some trouble, got into a fight with a guy. I don't know what happened. All I know is the outcome was and the police was looking for him. So my mother, she brought him to me way in Cleveland, Ohio, and said, here, and left him there. She just dropped him off on me and left him there.
Were your children around then?
We had a lot of fun. He used to take my baby daughter, Mal, and that one song by Cher, I Got You, Babe, Sonny and Cher. He used to take her mouth moving like, because she was a baby. I got you, babe. He's so stupid. He taught them how to cook, too. He taught my children how to cook. He was always in survival mode, too. That's what you either had to swim or drown.
What were his ambitions? What did he want to be, or who did he want to be when he grew up?
I just think he wanted to be outside of that home and have his own. He wanted his own place, a job, a car, and live a normal life, whatever that is. That's all he wanted. He wanted stability, love, a place where he could call home.
How long was he with you for?
For like 90 days. He was ready to go back. So I let him go back, and he didn't even last 90 days in Milwaukee.
On April 7th, 1991, Rita's brother, Earl Lindsay, leaves his home to go get a key cut.
They had very much hardship. Hardship was in that household, so I'm pretty sure they was hungry or something that day. He went upstairs to live with the neighbors, and they gave him a key to go get made. And that's when he ran into Jeffrey Dahmer, because the key shop was next door to the bookstore. That's how he met Jeffrey Dahmer. This part of Earl's story is just coming out. For, it's always been told, oh, Jeffrey Dahmer killed him, one of the victims. It's never told why he ran into Jeffrey Dahmer, never told if he was really gay or not, never told his living situation, never told how he was raised, how he was brought up. It never told that part. As a matter of fact, it never really told none of the victim's story. It was always about Jeffrey Dahmer and the people he murdered. Well, I can speak for Earl. There's a reason why he ran into him. His story is sort of different from the rest of the guys, and then they come from a different family background. I survived. He didn't survive it.
Can you tell us what happened on that day when he met Jeffrey Dahmer?
He bribed him and asked him if he wanted to make some money doing odd jobs. And he told him, yeah. So he told him he had to come back to his apartment. And that's what happened. And then he offered him that beer after he got in his apartment and put that sleeping potion in it. He killed Earl that day, April 7th.
The circumstances of Earl's death are incredibly harrowing, but I think it's important that we don't shy away from them. After meeting near the bookstore, Dahmer takes Lindsay back to his apartment and drugs him. By now, Dahmer's apartment has become a Dantean epicenter of pain, deviance, and torture, as victim after victim find themselves in Dahmer's clutches. He works to a pattern. He lures victims to his apartment by offering to take their picture or paying them for sex. He gives them drinks laced with sleeping pills, and then he kills them using the easiest means available to him: strangulation, stabbing, etc. Once dead, he dismembers them and enjoys the bodies by photographing them, practicing necrophilia, and keeping the body parts he likes best. But with Earl, Dahmer wanted to try something new. What if he could keep him longer? What if he could put him in a zombie-like state? Dr. Fred Berlin explains.
He began thinking of ways of still being close to the people whose lives he was taking. Was there some way that they could still be there physically as companions? Maybe he could create a zombie that was not quite dead, but something between life and death. Very, very disturbed thinking that was part of him still, in a sense, trying to be with someone who wasn't quite dead, but was sort of half alive.
His idea is horrific. He plans to conduct an amateur lobotomy on his victims by drilling holes into their skulls in which he will pour acid while they are still alive.
I started using the drilling technique. I was getting tired of killing them and having to deflesh them. So I wanted to see if it was possible to make, again, it sounds really gross, zombies, people that would not have a will of their own but would follow my instructions without resistance.
He attempts to do this to Earl Lindsay, but he's dead within hours. Dahmer proceeds to strip the skin off of his lifeless body, and he keeps it in a vat of salt water in hopes of preserving it and keeping it with him. After several weeks, it putrefies, and Dahmer is forced to dispose of it. He adds Lindsay's skull to his collection. Meanwhile, Earl Lindsay's family is left wondering where he is. When did you first realize that your brother Earl was a missing person?
He probably had been missing for a while. Nobody was paying any attention. Nobody. He left home with no coat. He hadn't came home. It had snowed and everything. No Earl, no coat. Yeah. And then people were coming up to my mother and stuff, said that they saw Earl here and they saw Earl there, and just misleading her on. And now she knew something had happened to him because she is truly his mother. A mother knows. She knew something had happened to him. She started getting nervous.
The wait for answers would go on for months. This really changed the course of your life, didn't it?
Yes, I really don't have any peace. I don't have a life anymore. My life doesn't belong to me anymore. That's the part I really hate. I just should have made him stay with me. He just should have stayed with me. Yeah, because that made me feel crazy. I'm like, oh, my brother's living with me and he goes home to his mother and then he died. I'm like, he just should have stayed with me.
Within weeks, Jeffrey Dahmer is out hunting again. On May 24th, 1991, at a gay bar in Milwaukee called the 219 Club, he approaches 31-year-old Tony Hughes, who is deaf. The pair have been loose acquaintances for a while and communicate via writing. Dahmer invites Hughes back to his apartment. Within hours, Tony Hughes would be dead, drugged, strangled, and then left on the bedroom floor for days. What is striking about Jeffrey Dahmer is that all of his victims, whether straight or gay, go with him willingly. I want to understand how he was able to do this, so I speak with LGBTQ historian Michael Takash, who was part of the gay scene in Milwaukee at the time of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes. Can you tell us anything about how Jeffrey Dahmer would lure his victims?
So I do have a former colleague who I worked with quite closely who was a bar manager at the bar that Jeffrey Dahmer unfortunately frequented. But this colleague shared that it was all about the charm. So people would come to the bar, and this was a mixed race bar, which was fairly common in Milwaukee's gay community and still is. For a very segregated city, Milwaukee's gay community was hardly segregated at all, going back to the early years of the gay rights movement. From what I understand and from what I've read and learned and heard, Jeffrey Dahmer was a charmer, and he would charm people who really felt kind of invisible and felt unseen. And he would find those people and make them feel very, very seen. He would make them feel very, very important. And moving in on those people and making them feel recognized and validated and special in cases where maybe they didn't have that in their day-to-day life due to, whatever reason, really made them susceptible to his ways. That was really the MO of Dahmer, was to find people in a public place, charm them into trusting him, and then take them out of that environment where they, had resources and kind of a safety net to a place where he could control them completely.
It's against this backdrop that Jeffrey Dahmer makes his preparations. If he's going to have so much death in his apartment, he needs a way to control it. He buys padlocks in case he needs to keep his victims secure, and a big blue vat to dissolve the bodies in acid. His activities do not go unnoticed by his neighbor, Vernell Bass, and his then-wife, Pam. Vernell is the author of Across the Hall and explains further. Something that may not have been easily explained away is in 1991, the blue barrel appears. Tell us what Dahmer said to you about that.
Well, I went into his apartment for some reason, and I noticed the barrel, the blue fat, in the kitchen in the middle of the floor, and it had the lid on it. And so I asked him, I said, wow, Jeff, I said, man, why you got this? And he said, he was so smart. He didn't answer my question, but he did answer my question. He said, I just wanted it. Okay, I couldn't say for what, or nothing like that, that he answered my question. It was none of my business after that,
Yeah, you can't press.
Yes. And he told me that he had gotten it from his job, and he called a cab, and the cab came and picked him up. He put it in the trunk, and then drove it back to his apartment, to the building, and in the cab.
So you lived probably closest to him, being right across the hall. Did you ever hear any unusual noises coming from his apartment?
Yes, I heard a saw going. It was either a saw or a drill. And I couldn't distinguish the difference from one from the other. And I heard it one evening coming home from my classes that I had. And so I went in my apartment. I asked Pam, I said, wow, what is he doing over there? What is he building? And she said that she had seen him bringing some wood into his apartment, and she thought that he was building a bookcase. Then 2 days later, I was coming in from my class, and I overheard him swearing. Motherfucker, see what you made me do? That's what I heard him say, yeah. And so I edged to the door to listen more, but it went silent. I didn't hear anything.
Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbors noticed something else, too. A terrible smell.
It was really bad. It would be really bad toward the night, but it seemed like in the daytime it just lingered. And so that started to give people toward the end of the building that lived close to him, started to focus in on where the smell was coming from.
And your then wife pinpointed it to Dahmer's apartment, didn't she?
What she did was she set a chair in the hallway and left our door open and sat in our doorway and waited for him to come home. And that's when he told her, he apologized to her and gave her $20. And she let him use the fan to air out his apartment. And that's when he told her that his freezer had quit working, and the meats must have spoiled inside the freezer.
Vernell had no way of knowing the true source of the smell. The bodies Jeffrey Dahmer is disposing of within his own apartment. And things were about to get a whole lot worse. It's May 26, 1991, 2 days after the murder of Tony Hughes, and a 14-year-old boy named Konorak Synthesymphone is at the Grand Avenue Mall, Milwaukee. He's approached by an older man with dark blonde hair and glasses. The man offers to give him money to pose for some pictures. The boy accepts. But this is all a trap, all part of a cruel game. Once back at the apartment, Jeffrey Dahmer offers the child a drink.
I'd say I wanted, let's have some coffee with some Irish cream in it So the coffee would dissolve the pills. They'd never see the pills in there. And that would be it. Within a half hour, they'd be asleep.
While the boy is unconscious, Dahmer drills a hole in his head and administers the acid. Annie Schwartz. Can you explain what happens next?
Jeffrey Dahmer went out of his house to get beer, wanted to get more beer. He had already drugged Konarak, but he didn't drug him enough. And while he was out of the house getting beer, Konarak woke up. They had already taken photographs. Konarak posed for some very sexualized pictures for Dahmer. He took them with his Polaroid and then passed out. But he woke up. And when he woke up, Jeffrey Dahmer was gone. Konarak doesn't know what's happening. He runs out of the house, runs down the alley. He's naked, but he's obviously drugged. What no one knows, not only was he drugged, but he had a very small hole drilled in the top of his head where Dahmer was attempting to inject chemicals to create kind of zombies.
In the street, Konarak is clearly distressed, and a neighbor raises the alarm and calls emergency services.
And this is young man, he is butt naked, he has been beaten up, he is very bruised up. Where's the ad? 25th and State, the corner of 25th and State.
The police show up because a neighbor, a woman who lived in the alley across from Dahmer's apartment building, saw Konarak running up the alley and called the police. She said there's a boy running up the street naked and bleeding. Those were her words. When the police arrive, there is already an ambulance there. Konarak is sitting on the back part of the ambulance, kind of like sitting in and out like you might if you were sitting on someone's tailgate, with the silver or blanket, looks kind of like aluminum foil. He's wearing that blanket, and the police are there. They're just going over to talk to Konarak and to the medics when Jeffrey Dahmer shows up. Now, Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't panic. It's important to tell this part of the story because lest I be called an apologist for the police, it's important to hear all of the pieces of this story. Remember what Dahmer is. Dahmer is in a neighborhood that is riddled by crime. It is largely an African-American neighborhood. It is a poor neighborhood, lots of challenges. And Dahmer walks up to the police. Good evening, officers. He is calm. He doesn't act like anything is crazy wrong. He says, this is my boyfriend. And he got a little drunk. Okay, got real drunk. And I'm just, I'll take him back upstairs. I feel bad that, that he inconvenienced you guys.
They checked him out and figured he was real drunk. They told me to take him back. He was not wanting to go back. So one officer grabbed his one arm and the other grabbed his other arm on the other side, and they escorted him to my apartment. They laid him on the sofa.
What is striking to me about this moment is how Dahmer displays no anticipatory fear. It reminds me of the stories we heard about his childhood. Stealing the pig from class, standing in photos he wasn't supposed to be in, acting crazy in the mall. He simply doesn't have the heart-racing, blood-pumping somatic markers that come with the fear of consequence. He just doesn't get nervous like we do. Now, this is a feature of psychopathy, and I am not saying Jeffrey Dahmer is a psychopath, but he is clearly demonstrating this particular trait. And we've seen it before, when he was stopped with the body of Stephen Hicks, for example. Without anticipatory fear, he has the ability to stay cool, calm, manipulative, and goal-driven.
He was an astute liar and a master manipulator. And I use those words repeatedly because people are fond of saying that this is racial. And I tell the story the way that I remember it because I was there. I'm not retelling it because somebody else told me the story. I was living here in this city, and I was covering this case as a reporter. I'd covered a lot of other cases as a reporter here. So When I think about the atmosphere, when I think about the city, when I think about the police having contact with a literate, smooth human being without any of the other factors, their hackles didn't go up either. Their antenna didn't go up either. So to their credit, the police don't say, oh, okay, and then leave. They say, well, let's go back upstairs with you to your apartment. So the officers go with Dahmer and now why can't Konarak talk? Because first of all, he's not a great English speaker. Second of all, he's drugged, which Dahmer is explaining as being drunk. And he has a hole in his skull. So they take, the police go with Dahmer back up to the apartment. And here's what Dahmer shows them. Dahmer's apartment looks like any apartment of just about any single guy that maybe didn't have a ton of money. It was not a torture chamber. He did not have human remains in full view all over the home. He didn't have that. You walked in, you saw the living room. There was no probable cause for those officers to see any further in that home.
I had the apartment, nice looking, clean apartment. It didn't look like there was anything askew or anything, so it was a big front. It worked to my advantage.
At this precise moment they are in Dahmer's apartment, all the police officers need to do is look around, and the nightmare would be over.
They didn't go into my bedroom. If they had, they would have seen the body of Tony Hughes still lying in there.
I still talk with them to this day. And they always say, really, do you think that it occurred to either one of us that maybe there are decomposing bodies in the next room? I mean, it's 1991. This case is, we never talk about this kind of thing. Dahmer has the pictures of Konarak. He's naked. He's posing. Konarak's clothing is folded neatly in the corner of the couch. And when Konarak sits down on the couch, they think he's intoxicated, he's drunk, but he's not struggling to get away. He's not screaming for help. He's not trying to get away. So this is all the information that the officers have as they're standing there. Not to be an apologist. That is what they're seeing.
The officers leave Konarak's synthesis phone in the care of Jeffrey Dahmer and dial in the incident, laughing as they describe it.
The intoxicated Asian naked male was returned to his sober boyfriend, and we're be a minute. My partner's going to get deloused at the station.
He administers another syringe full of acid into the 14-year-old boy's head. It proves fatal, and he's dead within an hour of being left by the police. The neighbor who first alerted emergency services about Konarak calls the police again as she's concerned he is a minor.
How old was the child?
It wasn't a child, it was an adult.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Are you positive?
It's all taken care of, ma'am.
Michael, even with the distance of 30-plus years, this moment in Dahmer's killing spree gives me chills still. The officers were so close to stopping him. How could this happen? The neighbor even called the police department to follow up.
Well, that I wish they'd handled it differently. I think if they had listened to this lady saying, no, go back or check, he's younger than that, had they taken that more seriously, and had they gone back that night to check again, just to follow up on that. Let's see his birth certificate. Let's see his wallet. We want to see how old he is. But and they'd gone back and checked that, just said, well, let's see. Right then, that would have ended it. They would have had him. Dahmer, had they started to check, they'd have found Tony's another body in the next room. They made a bad call. And they could have done better, perhaps, but especially when responding to this woman's urging, check it out more closely.
So Dahmer's this clean-cut white guy, and then there's a seemingly drunk Asian boy and another woman of color saying, hey, can you please check this out? This isn't what it looks like. Do you think that was playing into it? Like, okay, here we have the sophisticated white guy, and he's telling us that this is just his lover and it's no big deal. And somehow that trumped everything else they were seeing and hearing.
One has to hope that wasn't it. How do you know?
Annie Schwartz.
I wish that the officers would have had a reason to look further. Maybe Dahmer could have been stopped that night. But they didn't. There was nothing. We're dealing with a master manipulator. Jeffrey Dahmer was a master manipulator. That manipulation extended to his family, to his schoolmates when he was young, to his fellow soldiers when he was serving in the army, later to the police, to the courts, to judges. He was a master manipulator. So to say that people were somehow, duped by this murderer, yes, they were.
I have no doubt that Jeffrey Dahmer, who isn't just smart, he's an IQ of 145, is manipulating those around him. But he's doing so in a way that knowingly plays on existing prejudice and preconceived notions of what a criminal looks like. I want you to listen to how Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbor, Vernell Bass, describes typical interactions with the police in that neighborhood.
That area, I would guesstimate maybe a 12 to 15 block radius. If they saw a group of guys just congregating, a police car would pull up at high speed, to jam on his brakes, all four doors would open, and the police would get out, and if they ran, then they had other squads around to try to apprehend that person if he ran. But if they didn't run, then the police would make them get up against the wall and search them and, see whatever they could find. So that was going on quite a bit.
The difference in how Dahmer is treated that night is stark. For Rita Isbell, whose brother had been murdered by Dahmer just a few months before, it's painful. Do you feel that law enforcement did enough to find your brother and prevent future crimes?
You know better than that. Come on now. Okay, if you see a young man bleeding outside, you know that's a problem. When you think it's funny and let him take the child back to his apartment, what police? You're not the police. You're an asshole. You're a criminal too. Come on, this is a game to y'all. Y'all see how that is? Sweep it under the rug. That's how the whole Milwaukee is. Nobody pays attention to nothing. You got this man that chose this apartment building in this predominantly black neighborhood where you can do and get away with anything because nobody's paying attention.
I return to Michael Takash. Do you think Dahmer selected his victims based on who he thought might not be missed as much, and then thereby he gets away with murder for a lot longer?
I do, unfortunately, and it's no judgment of the victims or the lives that they lived or their families or their heritage or their upbringing. I think that he applied a very racist view to his victims. His ultimate goal was to make people into kind of mindless slaves, which is really even more terrifying than the idea of killing people, is the idea of subjugating them to this like half-life as a kind of undead, zombie that's under the control of a master. The scariest part of all of this is that, these people weren't missed immediately. And some of them certainly were, but the majority were not. And he knew that. Another thing he quickly learned, because, as he was navigating this whole system of his, he quickly learned that the police were kind of on his side.
You're hitting on something here that is a theme, and it's that he is a very bright guy. I don't think anything he did was an accident.
No, nothing he did was an accident. The location of his apartment was no accident. He went to a place where he thought that he wouldn't be seen or noticed because he was surrounded by people who were not seen by the authorities and who were not considered to be valuable. And again, another moment in time that I hope never comes again is a time where in a majority-minority city, police officers don't listen to African-American women when they say something's wrong. I mean, the neighbors and the neighborhood sounded all kinds of alarm bells. The mothers of the victims sounded all kinds of alarm bells. And no one sat back and pieced this together, despite all the time, all the resources, and all the voices that were being raised. I still to this day don't understand how that happened. Like, I can't wrap my head around it at all.
White, smooth-talking, bright Jeffrey Dahmer cruises around with a bloodied, clearly in an altered state teenager. And it's, okay, let him go.
At the time, I believe Conrad Synthesophones was around my age. And although I was not friends with him and did not know him, I know people who did. To think that anyone could have mistaken that person for an adult making conscious decisions, much less an adult in a relationship with another man, I still don't understand any of this. Like, it's the worst part of all of this is trying to understand what this police force was doing. It is almost harder to understand their actions than to understand the actions of the serial killer themselves. Because he was simply being a predator, a monster. Like, we can demonize Jeffrey Dahmer all we want to, but how does that explain the people who let this happen? That's what I struggle with the most.
There's a final sting in this tale. Conrad Synthesophones is the brother of the boy Dahmer had spent time in prison for sexually assaulting 3 years earlier.
They became more objects than people. I didn't think of the families, didn't think of what they'd go through. It just made it easier. Just sexual objects.
Dahmer is serving 15 consecutive life sentences for the murders of 17 males.
The most prolific slayer in the history of the state of Wisconsin.
From 1978 to 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys. He cannibalized some of his victims, dismembered their bodies, and preyed on the vulnerable, becoming one of the most depraved serial killers in American history. But what is the real story of this most unlikely of killers? And could this ever happen again? I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Mind of a Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer. Episode 5, Body Parts. It's June 30th, 1991, and we're in Chicago, Illinois, where the city is alive with excitement. Tens of thousands of people have traveled from all over America to be part of the annual Gay Pride Parade. Just 20 years earlier, there were only 300 people involved. Now the crowd numbers 100,000. There's music, political activism, and celebrations. As the parade draws to a close, 20-year-old Matt Turner waits at a bus stop to make his journey home. It's here that he's approached by a blonde-haired, slightly older man. It's Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer compliments Turner's looks and offers to pay him money to have some professional photographs taken. Turner agrees, and the pair take the Greyhound bus from Chicago to Milwaukee, and then a cab to a run-down part of town. In apartment 213, Dahmer gives Turner a drink polluted with drugs, and the young man soon begins to feel woozy. Watching, waiting, biding his time, Dahmer grabs a strap and strangles Turner to death. He dismembers his body before storing his head in the freezer and packing the rest into a big blue vat of acid. Another young life cut brutally short. Turner's father was interviewed in 1991.
The guy learned the men from photos and things. Matt loved it, taking pictures and things. And I think it was his aspiration to be a model at one time, so I could see where it was kind of easy to bring him in on photos.
By July 6th, Jeffrey Dahmer is on the hunt again. He kills 3 young men in the space of just 14 days. Jeremiah Weinberger, followed by Oliver Lacey, and then Joseph Breithoft. The men are drugged and dismembered, but the depravity has gone up a level. Dahmer stores their heads in his freezer and saves Oliver Lacey's heart to eat later. The speed of his killings is staggering, and Dahmer is no longer able to compartmentalize his life. His crimes are seeping into the daylight life. He hasn't been to work in days. Vernell Bass is the author of Across the Hall and was a neighbor of Jeffrey Dahmer.
He told me that he had got fired from his job, but he didn't dwell on it. And the way I found out was that when he should have been sleeping, he wasn't sleeping, he was drinking. And that's when I asked him about, don't you have to go to work? And that's when he told me that he had lost his job for being late too many times. And then the smell, everybody was complaining on the second floor about the smell, and it had gotten to the point where the management had started knocking on his door, complaining about the smell as well. And the smell wouldn't go away. He had been served an eviction notice. And now he's got the smell, he's getting pressure from the neighbors, from us. He's got management evicting him. He has no income. And I think that he got so caught up, wrapped up into killing, that became his main focus, to where he became careless.
Here, Jeffrey Dahmer describes in horrifying detail the meticulous process he develops.
Just slit from the sternum to the, pubic area, remove the internal organs, and then cut the flesh starting from the calves, legs, and then up. Remove the head, put that in the freezer, and the skeleton that was defleshed, I would put that in a large 80-gallon cooking pot that I had, pour in the box of that wall cleaning solution. I'd strip the remaining flesh off, turn up to a boil, and I did the same with the heads. So I had a big clean skeleton, and sometimes I would save portions of the flesh for consumption. Most of it went out in the garbage or in the acid bath, and a lot of the unused skeletons went in the acid bath too, or were flushed down the toilet. So that's how it was done.
A few days after the murder of Joseph Breithoft, Dahmer is out on the prowl again. He approaches 3 men and offers to give them $100 to accompany him to his apartment and pose for nude photos. One of the men, Tracy Edwards, agrees. When he enters the apartment, Edwards notices the smell and the boxes of acid. The Exorcist 3 is playing on the TV, and his host is frankly odd. Dahmer is drinking heavily and chanting to himself. Edwards knows he needs to get the hell out of there. Annie Schwartz is the author of Monster, the true story of the Jeffrey Dahmer murders.
Jeffrey Dahmer was killing at such a pace that he was just getting careless and he was getting messy. And he had brought Tracy Edwards home, then throws a handcuff on Tracy Edwards, puts a knife to his throat, which is not, none of this was really Dahmer's MO. He was getting careless. And Tracy Edwards jumped up and ran out of the apartment. He was able to overpower Dahmer, and he ran out of the apartment. He's running down the street. He's in his underwear with one handcuff hanging off of his wrist, and he's running down the street. And he sees a police squad. Now he sees the police squad, and he approaches the police squad because he just wanted to get the handcuff off. He wasn't going to report Jeffrey Dahmer. He wanted that handcuff off. He's not going to report anything to the police. So he runs up to the cop car. He's got the handcuff hanging there. And he says to the officers, hey, you guys got a key? I can get this off? And the joke the cops made with him was, hey, which one of us did you escape from? And then Tracy Edwards starts rambling on and on. about the crazy guy and these scary pictures, and then the guy put a knife to my neck, and, you know, he's telling the craziest stories. He is telling the most fantastical information to these two officers, Rolf Mueller and Bob Routh, and they decide to go back with Tracy Edwards up to the apartment, which, not exactly police procedure to take the victim back to the place where the person who victimized them was, but these things are all lost in the inevitability of what happened. So they knock on the door of Dahmer's apartment. Dahmer opens the door and he sees the police. Well, he's okay with that, because remember, he's evaded the police before. He has been able to talk his way out of this before. So the officers say, yeah, can we have a conversation with you? And Dahmer says, sure. He's opening the door a little bit more and then sees Tracy Edwards behind them. Panics, and now we're off to the races. Now he starts to fight with the officers. They get him decentralized. They get him on the ground. And that is the moment that Dahmer stops fighting with them, because he knows he's caught. It's over. So now the officers are looking around because this guy said something about a knife, and, you know, this guy obviously didn't want them to come in the house, so what's going on?
They find the knife, don't they? Tell me what happens next.
I don't know how to explain it, but for those that know police officers, ask them what they do at almost every single crime scene. They always open the refrigerator. It's not to get something to eat. It's just, you always open the refrigerator. It's just something that cops do. So one of the officers, Rolf Mueller, opens up the refrigerator, and there is a human head in the refrigerator on a plate. And Rolf Mueller slams the door of the refrigerator and screams. Bob Routh described it as just a blood-curdling scream. And he screamed to Bob, there's an effing head in the refrigerator. Bob comes out, they start looking around, and they finally call for detectives, they call for sergeant, they call for other people to come to the crime scene. Because what are they looking at? It stinks, but what does it stink like? So they call for backup, they call for more people, and now other people are coming to the scene.
It's late, and it doesn't take long for Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbor, Vernell Bass, and his then-wife, Pam, to be disturbed by the unfolding events.
When they arrested him, Pam and myself, we were asleep. And I heard the knocking on the door, and so I got up to answer the door, to look out and see who it was. And when I looked through the peephole, saw two police officers standing at my door. And so I panicked a little bit, you know, trying to think, what had I done for the police to be here? You know, that's the first thing that went to my mind, you know, why are they here? And so I looked out again, and that's when one of them parted, and I could see that Jeff's door was open. I could see that there were police officers in his apartment with the door open. And so that's when I yelled, told them just a minute. And so I put on a house coat, and then I went back and answered the door. And that's when they told us that we had to evacuate the building. That was the reason that they had woke us up, because we had to get out of the building, because they had found toxic chemicals in his apartment. And so that's when I asked, where's Jeff? Is he okay? And that's when one of the officers told me, yeah, that fucker is okay. He's okay. And he's in jail. I just followed their instructions as far as getting out of the building.
Where did everybody go when they were evacuated?
We went to the rear of the building. Everybody was standing right there, watching. It was after midnight.
Did you see them carrying out the items from Jeff's apartment?
Oh, sure. I was watching as they brought out the small freezer, and I also witnessed them bringing out the blue barrel. They brought that out, and then I also observed them bringing out the little small boxes that he had the skulls in. I was watching that. And as they were taking out the boxes, the smell was leaving with them. By the time the last box was gone, the smell was gone entirely.
The discovery of multiple human body parts in an apartment is not something that can be kept secret for long. Annie Schwartz's connection to this case begins on the night of the discovery. She was a young reporter at the Milwaukee Journal at the time.
Someone calls an intrepid young reporter and says, "You're not going to believe what we just found." So initially, when I heard them say to me, "It looks like this guy's been saving body parts," I thought, oh, was he robbing graves? Was he stealing bodies from a morgue? I mean, those are all my frames of reference. We didn't have Dexter. Not a lot of true crime back in that time.
Right, and it's not going to come to mind that he's killing people and keeping the body parts. You're not going to think of that.
But when I arrived at the scene, they had evacuated the whole building because of the barrel, because it was chemical. And he was keeping chemicals, and they didn't know what kind of hazardous materials this was, so they evacuate the building. The residents come out, I show up, and there is not police tape up yet on the front door. It was, no kidding, the creepiest crime scene ever, because when I came upon it, when I walked up the lawn and up to the apartment building, there are all kinds of people out on the lawn, but it's quiet. And that's not what a crime scene is like. They're loud, people are talking, sometimes people are laughing, they're all sharing their theories, but this was really quiet. I interviewed a couple of the people who were Dahmer's neighbors, but then I went into the building, and then I went up to apartment 213. I saw Rolf Mueller standing outside in the hallway, the officer that had opened the refrigerator. And he had his hands covering his face. Later on, I would see that photograph of him standing like that, because a photographer for the Milwaukee Journal, the paper that I was working for at the time, managed to capture it. And Rolf Mueller was never the same. He was haunted by this case for the rest of his life. Officer wellness is a new term. Back then, you open a refrigerator and you find a head inside and somebody says, "Suck it up, Buttercup, don't forget to write your report." He never got over the trauma of that. He had nightmares, and his wife said that he was never the same.
What else did they find in the apartment?
Skulls were found everywhere. They found skulls in his closet. They found skulls in his refrigerator. And they saw this makeshift altar that he was going to try and have come true. Remember that so much of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes were about making some fantasy come true. And one of the fantasies that he developed was this idea that he could have a shrine to his victims.
So you're a reporter and you've got this incredible story. What happens next?
I had Jeffrey Dahmer's name very early. And we had a lot of discussions on the news desk that morning. Are we gonna share this name? He hasn't been charged yet. And we decided that the case was so huge that we couldn't not share Jeffrey Dahmer's name. So the very first story, which was broken in our newspaper by me, the headline was "Body Parts Litter Apartment." And that was the first story. And after that story came out, it was just a floodgate of people that come forward and say, "My loved one has been missing. Is my daughter one of these people? Is my son one of these people? So now the police are getting all kinds of people coming forward saying, let's see if my loved one is one of those people.
The situation is unparalleled. Usually, serial killers do all they can to get rid of any evidence within their home. With Jeffrey Dahmer, police have stumbled upon an apartment that's not only full of evidence, but parts of his victims, too. But how on earth are they quite literally going to piece it all together?
The only reason the last guy got away was because I was completely unconscious for at least 6 hours. I have no memory of anything that happened, but I was still functioning. I came back to consciousness 5 minutes before I heard the knock at the door. And there were the police. I didn't have any time for a cover story or anything.
It's terrifying to think that had Tracy Edwards not approached the police to remove his handcuff, Jeffrey Dahmer may have continued for months, maybe even years longer. But on July 23, 1991, police finally have Jeffrey Dahmer in custody. It is 13 years since his first murder in Ohio, when he brutally killed hitchhiker Stephen Hicks. Dennis Murphy was a homicide detective in Milwaukee and was called in early to question Jeffrey Dahmer. Can you tell us about the night he was arrested?
At 3 in the morning, I got a phone call from the late shift lieutenant to come in and question a guy that had body parts all over his apartment. And I thought they were screwing around with me. He said, "I'll call you back," and he hung up. Well, then he called me back in an hour and says, "Get in here as soon as you can. We want you to talk to this guy. Just you and, at that time, Patrick Kennedy, who was a brand new homicide detective. I had gotten down to the office and was briefed on the skulls in the apartment, the body parts, the heart, the bicep, the bodies in the barrel. They had the refrigerator. I wasn't at the scene, but they briefed me on everything. And they said, make sure to go in there and get a good confession. So I talked to Kennedy after I got down there and after I was briefed. And he came out and said, "This guy's a nut." He said he killed 10, 12 people. So I went in and I introduced myself. And he looked at me and he says, "Why don't you just shoot me for what I did?" And those were his first words to me. And I says, "I don't want to do that. I want to talk to you. I want to find out what happened. I understand. I know what was in your apartment, and I have to identify a lot of these people, assuming everything was real." Then I sat down with Dahmer, and he says, "Do you mind if we call you Jeff? And you can call us by our first names." And we did. And we had a discussion for the next 10, 12 hours where we went into detail on everything he remembered.
What was he like?
Well, he was disheveled when I saw him because he had resisted the arrest. And then he had been drinking also. That was one thing Dahmer did. He drank on all the occasions when he did this. So he was disheveled and beaten. He was a beaten person. He could go nowhere. You know, he wasn't getting released. Later on, he said, "I'm going to make you guys famous."
He said those words?
Yes.
Did he ever talk to you about what motivated him to commit these crimes?
His own warped, selfish
desire for self-gratification.
What was going through your mind when he was telling you about the horrific things he'd done?
We knew he was going to have insanity pleas, so we had to make sure that what he was telling us was, complete. And like he planned it, he crunched up the house and he took a cab a block from his apartment, walked to it so no one would catch him. Everything was planned.
So your goal is to make sure that he demonstrated that this was all planned. That makes sense. That first interview must have been exhausting.
We got those 12 the first day we talked to him. And that long interview when I came in, and we went through them one at a time, took our time. We knew there was no rush. He's not going anywhere, so we had all the time in the world. He loved coffee. He loved cigarettes. And at that time, our building had a no smoking policy. Well, we allowed him to smoke and drink coffee and told him we'd keep him out of the bullpen, which is to house a group of prisoners, because we didn't want him associating with anyone. just by himself, and we didn't want him committing suicide, so we put him on suicide watch. Because he was, like he said, he told me to kill him. So we had to be careful and make sure that everything was done right.
That makes sense. There's a lot of pressure on you because you have many jobs at that point. You've got to get him to confess. You need to make sure that you're proving that he was sane when he did it. You have to start identifying the victims, and you have to make sure Dahmer's still alive. A lot of goals you're trying to fulfill at that moment.
Well, we had all the time in the world.
Did it seem to you that Jeffrey Dahmer was telling the truth? And did he seem remorseful at all?
He said he was sorry. I think he was sorry that he got caught, but he was sorry that for the families of the victims, but he never showed any emotion. You know, he just talked nonchalantly about it, and he helped us identify all of them by either the photographs he had taken in his apartment, which there were 85 of them. He remembered certain body parts on people. One was missing a kidney, one had another nipple.
One thing that's puzzled me is why I can't seem to generate more feeling. I mean, if I had been able to feel more emotion, this may not have happened. But it just seems like my emotional side has been deadened.
As district attorney, E. Michael McCann took an active interest in the Dahmer case.
We have an office of about 120, so it's a substantial office, and I spend most of my time doing administrative duties, but some major cases I take myself. In this one, I wanted to get involved in right away. Office of the medical examiner called me and said, look, we've got something going on here. So the next morning, first thing, I looked into it. Nobody knew at that time that there was actually going to be 16 people that he had killed in Milwaukee. But he, from the beginning on, he gave full confession to the police. He had a very excellent lawyer, a fine guy character, Jerry Boyle, who told him to be quiet, but he ignored that. And of course, you don't have to abide by what your lawyer says. And he was cooperative with the police almost from the beginning, giving a full statement. So now there's a community of people. The arrest has been made. It's in the newspapers. People, was my son, was he one of those people? You can imagine the agony of those people.
The pressure to identify these victims must have been huge.
Dahmer didn't have names, but he was cooperative on descriptions.
My main concern is getting these people identified so this can end for everybody. I want to get them all identified so this can be cleared up from beginning to end. Ohio was the first one, then no more until Wisconsin. I blacked out and it started again.
Even with the descriptions, this is still a mammoth task for the police. Annie Schwartz describes further.
The medical examiner's office was able to determine, just from the evidence at the scene, that we were looking at as many as maybe 10 or 11 victims. It turned out to be 17 victims, but in Dahmer's apartment. So this is 1991. What they were able to do in the Milwaukee Police Department was they made a photocopy of the human body. And after Dahmer's confession, they knew they had about 17 victims. So they made 17 copies of this human body. And so they take the copies, and as they found a femur, they would say, okay, well, circle the femur. And then, okay, well, here's a skull, but it's definitely not from the same body that femur was from. So the Milwaukee Police Department creates a war room, as does the medical examiner's office, that has all of these images hanging on the wall so that they can try to identify the victims.
Meanwhile, pressure from the residents of Milwaukee is growing. The police department is inundated with calls and inquiries from people wondering if their loved one was one of Dahmer's victims. Dennis Murphy. Tell me what it was like getting all these calls and inquiries from people related to missing persons and having to comb through everything and figure out, were these people, or were they not, victims of Jeffrey Dahmer?
Well, this investigation consisted of 68 detectives and patrolmen working together regarding family members missing. And what we did, we had a 24-hour hotline, and all calls were answered either by the uniform or by the detectives. We also had a detective at the medical examiner's office to recover all evidence or any evidence and make sure it was shipped to the FBI for further information in our investigation.
I returned to E. Michael McCann.
So it was quite, and you can imagine the concern. Medical examiner, please, my son, trying to find out whose body is this. The parts he had kept, these trophies more or less, weren't substantial parts. They could work, if it was a face, they could work with dentists, and it was quite a while that we were able to identify exactly who those 16 men were. It took a while. We could not have done it without Dahmer's help. It just could not have been done. Much of it had to come from information he gave, yeah.
There was one case that may still not have been linked had he not confessed, the murder of Stephen Hicks 13 years earlier.
We had been in contact with the family. When Dahmer confessed to our police the slaying in the Bath, Ohio, they notified the Bath, Ohio police, who came up to Milwaukee and interviewed him. It was, the whole thing was so sad for everybody, so sad for the families. I felt so badly, just starting with the family, in Ohio, all those years, not knowing what happened to your son, the pain of that. And then, again, I think I thought in my mind, the cops are coming. I could see a guy holding his wife's hand. I said, honey, it's not going to be good news. They called, it was good news. They called, said, hey, we're coming over. Put on we're going to have a drink. We've got something to tell you. They knew what was coming. And I just, as a parent, that would be hellish. 13 years gone, and to be told, no, your hopes, your dreams, he's not alive, he's gone.
Rita Isbell's family would also receive the same devastating news. How did you find out that your brother Earl was one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims?
The Red Cross knocked on my door, and I was way in Tennessee. Say, you and your kids pack your things, you have an emergency, we have to send you guys to Milwaukee.
The Red Cross.
They sent us here, we came here, all the family and relatives from out of town was here. But when I got here, they had a service where we were born in. Me and Earl was born in Indiana. It's this small town in Indiana we was born in, not too far from Milwaukee. So we all knew the funeral home there in Indiana. The funeral home offered to render services to my mother free. They came and got the remains and took her and her family back to Indiana and had the services there where he was born. And supposedly he was buried at the foot of my grandmother's grave.
Along with Earl Lindsay and Stephen Hicks, over the course of his interviews with Jeffrey Dahmer, Dennis Murphy and his colleagues would get the killer to confess to all 17 of his murders and identify the victims. But this is a process, and those with unanswered questions are filled with anger. People begin to ask, how did the police not know there was a serial killer in Milwaukee? And worse, how had he slipped through the net so many times? It doesn't take long for an explosive piece of information to be revealed. Back to Annie Schwartz.
The story very quickly evolved from a story about a serial killer to a story about why wasn't he caught earlier. It's the blame game, and the blame game came very early in the Jeffrey Dahmer case.
And you did a record search.
These are the days, it's no computer, it's boxes of reports. I'd requested the reports of any police activity on Dahmer's street for 6 months before the murders. And there was a lot of it, but I found that there were 2 police officers that had encountered Dahmer and a young man named Conrad Synthesymphone. That story became the story that really brought down the Milwaukee Police Department at that time.
As Milwaukee police deal with accusations of negligence and discrimination, Dahmer's legal team puts together a plan. Dahmer will admit his guilt, but he'll do so while pleading insanity.
Dahmer is serving 15 consecutive life sentences for the murders of 17 males.
The most prolific slayer in the history of the state of Wisconsin.
From 1978 to 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys. He cannibalized some of his victims, dismembered their bodies, and preyed on the vulnerable, becoming one of the most depraved serial killers in American history. But what is the real story of this most unlikely of killers? And could this ever happen again? I'm criminal psychologist Dr. Michelle Ward, and this is Season 4 of Mind of a Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer, Episode 6, The Trial. It's summer 1991, and the eyes of the world are on the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where a 31-year-old man is in police custody after multiple body parts have been found in his apartment. But he is not the only story. Questions are being raised about how such a man could be unseen by authorities for so many years. And debate quickly focuses on one incident in particular: the circumstances of Conrad Synthesymfone's death, the 14-year-old boy who the police had returned to Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment after he was found staggering in the street. Why did 2 police officers ignore a vulnerable child? Why was the neighbor who raised the alarm patronized and ignored? It becomes a fuse that lights a fire of anger and frustration toward the police. E. Michael McCann was Milwaukee's district attorney.
Part of the thing that caused such an uproar in the community, a woman who was calling the police and saying, "No, he's a young man, something's wrong here, check it." And they urged them, check it out closer, his age and so on. Had they gone back to the apartment, by that time, Conrad was probably dead. Or they'd asked, well, where's his card, his date of birth, his wallet, we want to see that. And the thing would have been done. And when the community found out about that case, fairly or unfairly, there was a lot of strong feelings about the police. The older officers were fired.
Dennis Murphy was a lead detective on the Jeffrey Dahmer case. I want to know what he thinks. Why do you think it was that Dahmer's crimes went undetected by the police?
Because he planned everything and he was alone. He had control of everything. He had control of his apartment. He had control when he'd go into a bar and he'd pick out who he wanted. He would make sure he had control over it, over the situation. You'd take a cab. You'd have him drop him off a block away.
Do you think some of his personal characteristics, like being white, mild-mannered, he was definitely clever in the way he talked to police, do you think that helped him in these situations he'd get into?
No, I don't think so.
I find it hard to agree with Dennis here. I believe the way Dahmer is seen and presents himself is precisely why he was able to go undetected for so long. And the racial dimensions to this case have many layers. Not only are the police accused of negligence, but as the identities of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims become known, the public finds it impossible to ignore the fact that he had been preying predominantly on young men and boys of color. Of his 17 victims, only 3 are white. He's labeled a racist killer. While tensions rumble on, Jeffrey Dahmer is interviewed extensively by police, FBI, and psychiatrists. And the scale of his disturbed mind begins to emerge. He tells them that he had an ambition to create a shrine of skulls.
I was reading a lot of literature on it and wondering whether it was possible to gain even more power through rituals and stuff. That's why I had the altars set up and everything, with painted skulls.
And he explains precisely how he cooked and consumed his victims' body parts.
It started out as experimentation. Made me feel like they were more a part of me. On the stove, on the skillet, just like you prepare a regular piece of meat, they'd be cut into, sizes that were small enough to eat. Hearts, liver, thigh meat, biceps. I don't know how you describe it. You've had filet mignon, haven't you? Very tender.
Despite his confession, the lack of evidence means Dahmer will not be charged for the murder of Stephen Toomey, his second victim. So, the case in Wisconsin rests on the 15 other murders he committed in Milwaukee. On January 13, 1992, he formally pleads guilty. But there is a huge caveat. He claims to have been insane when killing his victims. It will go to trial, not to determine his guilt, but to determine whether Jeffrey Dahmer was insane, and an insanity verdict would carry a much lighter sentence. Is Jeffrey Dahmer trying to slip through the cracks again? It is a case like no other, and both the prosecution and the defense build their arguments. With so many families bereaved, the stakes are incredibly high. The defense will try to prove Jeffrey Dahmer has a mental disorder that rendered him legally insane at the time he committed his crimes. E. Michael McCann explains the definition.
The test in Wisconsin, whether due to mental disease or defect, the defendant lacked substantial capacity either to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct or to comply his conduct with the law.
Our law requires that you can't control yourself, basically. That's the defense. There was very little disparity between the assessments by the prosecution and the defense, except on that issue. They were drawn almost down the line. That he was a necrophiliac, that he was an alcoholic, that he was not psychotic. Only one doctor for the defense said psychotic. No others, the prosecution, the defense, the court, all said he was not psychotic. And the issue focused on our law was, did he appreciate that it was wrong? They all said yes. The issue is, could he control himself? That's the case boiled down to that.
Dahmer's family hires Jerry Boyle to be his defense attorney. But with the burden of proof on the defense, he needs a respected authority to argue their case. Enter Dr. Fred Berlin. How did you become involved in the Jeffrey Dahmer case?
The Dahmer case got a tremendous amount of notoriety, so I'd actually heard about it on television, was hearing about it, just thought I'd be another person who was reading and watching television and learning, and then I get a call from an attorney, Jerry Boyle, identifies himself as a lawyer for Mr. Dahmer and wants to know if I'd be willing to meet with him and discuss the case, and I agreed I would do that, and so we met. He talked with me. After he talked with me, he decided he wanted me to become involved. My role in the Dahmer case was one of evaluating him as a forensic psychiatrist with a jury that needed to ultimately decide questions of criminal responsibility. A strange part of all of this is when I went to the police office to review various documents, I remember looking at the picture of when his refrigerator door had been opened, and staring out of that refrigerator door was a severed human head. And I was, seeing all sorts of other gory stuff. And then I walk out of the police station at the end of that day. It's a bright, sunny day. It's very pleasant. People are out walking around enjoying life. And I felt like I just left a Fellini movie, as though I'd left some horror movie and now I'm out in real life. Except that I wasn't leaving a horror movie. I was leaving a real-life horror, and that just struck me.
As district attorney, E. Michael McCann leads the prosecution himself. Can you describe the build-up to the trial?
The judge called in all the people and says, there's not going to be a circus here. This is going to be a very well, tightly controlled, ruled security in the courtroom. They did a very good job. No interviews with the press. The victims were all assigned seats. It was very thoroughly mapped out. And I did not read one criticism of the conduct of the case, how the courtroom was.
Rita Isbell, whose brother Earl had been murdered by Jeffrey Dahmer, is there too.
The trial was like a circus. It was really disrespectful, including the judge himself. He was sitting in that chair sleeping. I was so pissed. I was more pissed during the courts than I was what had really happened. They had reserved seat for Dahmer's parents. And with us, we had first come, first serve. We couldn't show no emotions. And Dahmer's attorneys kept trying to say that he was out of control and he was mental when all this happened. His defense team speaking up on him. So I'm like, BS. You got to be in a lot of control to do the shit he was doing. You know what I'm saying?
What was it like for you to be in that room with him?
Michelle, I said, I always grew up around that Jeffrey Dahmer spirit. It was just that Jeffrey Dahmer himself was the icing on the cake. I knew evil right away when I saw it. I recognized it. I did. Evil was in my home. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to protect any family members.
The media was there right from the beginning. What was that like?
The local media here needs to be shut down. They really do. They came to my house and asking me all those questions, and it was some kind of crazy. My children were young then. I still had to maintain my life, take care of my children, deal with my mother and the world.
Annie Schwartz had been the first journalist on the scene when the discoveries at Dahmer's apartment were made. She is one of many journalists to follow the trial.
The thing that was so exciting to us as journalists was the very first time we were going to see Dahmer, like in person. And that was his initial appearance, when he first appeared in court. And we were all sitting there. I was in the jury box because they had to figure out, like, what are we going to, have the courtroom look like? Court TV had decided that this was going to be one of their first televised trials. People learned how to see behind the curtain, and they learned by watching this trial all of the backstory, because that's what you get when you watch a trial, is you get all the backstory. You get to not only hear how Jeffrey Dahmer became who he was, you get to hear all of the psychology. You get to hear all of the ways that the police were able to figure certain things out. Now, the Jeffrey Dahmer case was not a whodunit. No one knew there was a serial killer operating in the city. And when he was caught, there was no, gee, I wonder who did this. I wonder if he's going to be found guilty. But the trial was really a strange time, because Milwaukee was just this relatively quiet Midwestern city. Nothing really ever happens. And all of a sudden, a city that was minding its own business became the center of the universe. And that's what happened in Milwaukee, that all the eyes were on us. All the eyes were on our police department. All the eyes were on our racial dirty laundry. All of the eyes of the world were on our city, and not in a great tourism kind of way. So we were kind of dealing with that, as well as covering this trial. We were also dealing with the fact that the media from out of town were examining our city to see how all of this could have happened. And it was kind of offensive to a lot of us, because we were like, wait a minute, it's not our fault.
What did Dahmer seem like in court? Did it seem as though he were insane?
What I learned covering the trial was that this trial was going to be about the legal definition of insanity. This was about the criminal insanity of Jeffrey Dahmer and whether or not he actually, his actions fit that definition. This was a really nuanced thing, because we look at Charles Manson right? He's got the swastika carved in his head. He's got those eyes that are just, out there. The hair is kind of flying all over the place, and we say that man is an insane person. But you look at Jeffrey Dahmer, and you look at someone who is very quiet. He's almost demure. He doesn't look you in the eye. He absolutely does not answer questions with any more than a monosyllabic answer to anything.
Jeffrey Dahmer's father, Lionel, was at the trial too. In 2020, he shared his recollections with the Mind of a Monster team.
What was it like? It was horrible. It was terrible. It was a terrible situation. All we could do was sit there and listen to the prosecuting attorney and Boyle, the defense attorney. It was just horrendous. It was just bad, really bad. Hurt badly. He didn't exhibit any emotion. He just sat with Boyle and his assistants and just listened. We didn't really get a chance to talk to him.
As the trial gets underway, it is a tense time for all involved. I returned to E. Michael McCann. Were you nervous? I mean, was there any part of you that thought you might not have gotten the verdict you wanted?
If you aren't nervous, you're not a good trial lawyer. You gotta have both. You gotta have that intensity, that preparation, knowing anything can go wrong, and you better be ready. Yeah, I always when I prepare a trial, I'm intense on it and on edge, and I'm not sleeping well at night and thinking about what'll come up tomorrow. And there's no such thing as a simple trial. I think even if you're serious, even disorderly conduct, you're gonna take it seriously. But yeah, I was under stress, of course.
What was there in terms of an evidence trail?
His statement, of course, was the most powerful thing against him, obviously. But these disappearances and his, the drugs in his apartment when he was arrested, there was different people's body parts in there.
Was there ever a moment when you worried you might not have the jury on your side?
Jerry Boyle, who was the defense attorney, is a very capable lawyer, and his best work is done before a jury. He's from Chicago, a level-headed guy, very likable. When he started arguing that Dahmer was like a train out of control, roaring down the tracks and couldn't stop himself, that's an interesting argument. And I thought, well, they're hearing a hell of a good argument here. One of my strongest arguments was when, with the young man that he had started to drill a hole and the guy got out on the street, the police arrived in the ambulance. Dahmer persuades those two officers. He's under tremendous stress. He tells them this is a lover, a sexual lover, and goes back to the apartment with them. Here they have in front of him, he's in the process almost of killing someone. He's got a dead body in the next room. He's got two officers there questioning him. This isn't a madman. This is a very smart, capable, effective guy that knows what he's doing. He doesn't break down in front of two cops.
Fred Berlin.
But, I look at this as a physician, and we're talking about a man who's having recurrent urges to have sex with dead bodies. He's thinking that he can create zombies by drilling holes in the heads of people, and they'll keep him company. He's thinking he can build a temple out of the sacred remains of the victims of people he's killed, and a devil may, or some force may reveal themselves. He's taking a skull to work with him, a human skull to keep him company. In any other setting, would anybody have said, this is a person of sound mind who doesn't have a mental disorder?
Proceedings take 2 weeks, which see police, psychiatrists, witnesses, and survivors like Tracy Edwards making testimonies to the court. On February 14th, 1992, the defense and the prosecution make their closing arguments. Remember, this is a trial to determine whether Jeffrey Dahmer was sane while committing the murders. The defense reiterates its argument that Dahmer's behavior was out of his own control and rooted in a mental disorder. The prosecution argues that he was fully in control and sane. The jurors convene, and the next day, the verdict comes in. The jury was asked, at the time of committing each of the 15 Milwaukee murders, did the defendant have a mental disease? Their answer is no.
Of the 12 jurors, only 2 said he had some illness, and none of them agreed that knocked out his ability to control himself. He was no more insane. That he was quite the contrary, a very well-organized, clever, smart, savage, brutal, intentional killer. And justice was done to him.
Before sentencing, the families of the victims are given the opportunity to make statements. E. Michael McCann.
We have what we call victim elocution in Wisconsin. The victims have a right before sentencing to take the podium and to say, this is what I think should get, 5 years, 10 years on. Well, we told each family they could do that. Each one select someone to be your spokesman. Well, the last lady that spoke, obviously strong recommendations for strong penalties. This young lady came angry, started across the room at Dahmer.
I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. Jeffrey, I hate you, motherfucker! I hate you! This is out of control!
It is an utterly explosive moment in the proceedings. She shouts out in righteous rage at Dahmer, and then she marches toward the killer. The young lady is Rita Isbell. Rita, tell me about that moment. I don't know if you planned for that or...
No, how can you don't know how to plan for stuff like that? Okay, they made me go last, first of all. After everybody else got up there and said what they were going to say, that pissed me off, because why would you call this man Mr. Anybody after what he did to your loved ones? And then he didn't leave. He didn't leave us with no body parts. He just left us with pieces. You get up there and say, Mr. Dahmer. I said, this is not real. This is a dream. I can only imagine being a parent, how that would make me feel. Because I keep telling everybody I'm just a sibling. So I don't even know if I still would be living right now in my right mind or what if that had been my child. We in the same building together. But you want me to compose myself. You want me to compose myself after looking in this man's face after what he did. And he's just sitting there like you don't faze him. And you probably don't, because I already know those were demons inside of his body operating him like that. Human beings just don't be born and grow up that way.
Wow. What did that finally feel like, to get to yell at him?
It didn't feel good because I didn't get to do what I wanted to do. Once I was up there, I said what I said. They were talking about him being out of control, and that's when I said, I'm going to show you or tell you what out of control is. So I went on to try to do that, but when I was looking in his face, I'm like, forget that. I hate your ass. I hate you. Yeah. I just wanted to touch him so bad. And I think it's crazy how the law protects murderers.
Did you want to reach over and just kill him?
No, I didn't want to reach over and kill him. No, I just wanted to start chopping him up right there. I really did want this to happen. Okay, you killed all your victims behind closed doors. I wanted you to be harmed in the public's eye. That's what I wanted.
To E. Michael McCann, that moment exposed the truth of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Dahmer doesn't react at all. He doesn't disdain her. He doesn't jump up to defend himself. He just sits there. There's Jeffrey. There's the real Jeffrey Dahmer, as cool as a cucumber, captured on national TV.
Before judgment is passed, Jeffrey Dahmer addresses the court.
Your Honor, it is over now. This has never been a case of trying to get free. I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself. This was a case to tell the world that I did what I did. Not for reasons of hate. I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both. But no matter what I did, I could not undo the terrible harm I have caused. My attempt to help identify the remains was the best that I could do. and that was hardly anything. I feel so bad for what I did to those poor families, and I understand their rightful hate. I should have stayed with God. I tried and failed and created a Holocaust.
Jeffrey Dahmer is sentenced to 957 years imprisonment for 15 murders. Dr. Fred Berlin, who was a witness for the defense, has misgivings.
I have some thoughts about the jury. You know, the jury didn't even decide that he had a mental disorder. And again, you know, the families of the victims were there. There was no death penalty in Wisconsin. I think there was a sense that if he was sent to a psychiatric hospital rather than prison, that the families were going to feel that justice hadn't been done. And then, no, they wouldn't have. So, and yet the jury, they didn't get to the question of criminal responsibility. And in Wisconsin, it didn't have to be a unanimous verdict. But the majority of the jury said that this was a person that didn't have a mental disease or defect. Again, I think they were trying to do what they felt the families would want to be done, in a sense, jury nullification. I think that's completely understandable at a human level. But I don't think that anyone in any other setting looking at what Mr. Dahmer's done could possibly conclude that he was of sound mind.
Dahmer seems like such a unique case, but the truth is there are people out there right now with very deviant fantasies. I want to know if there's anything we can do to prevent something like this from ever happening again. Dr. Fred Berlin.
Right, we need to do a better job educating the public. We do so little in terms of crime prevention at the level of the given individual. In other words, you know, somebody's, let's say a child's been sexually abused, we want to intervene and help, and that's really important, but that's picking up the pieces after the fact. When do we ever hear a public service announcement saying, if you're a young person, you're having troubling sexual feelings, you're worried this is going to cause you to hurt others, destroy your own life, please come in and let us help you before that happens. If you have a drug problem, there's public service announcements. Depression, there's public service announcements. Anorexia, there's public service announcements. But anything having to do with sex, and we don't try to reach out, and yet we're all sexual beings. There's numbers of people whose sexual feelings and makeup is different from the norm. Some of them may desperately be in need of help, and yet we don't want to acknowledge it. We don't want to encourage them to come in and get assistance. We simply demonize. And until we educate the public better, maybe it's partly our fault for not doing that, things are not going to change in a more positive direction.
Absolutely. And if we can do that, then we could have fewer victims.
Yeah, and that is very relevant to Mr. Dahmer. I mean, again, who knows? But had he known there was a place he could call, had he heard something like that, it certainly would have made it worse. And if there's some chance it would have made it better, we as a society should be demanding that we take that chance.
A few months after he is sentenced in Wisconsin, justice is also served in Ohio when Dahmer is put on trial for the murder of Stephen Hicks. Nearly 14 years after claiming his life, Dahmer is found guilty.
No parent should have to see pieces of their child on TV or in the newspapers. We did.
For the family and friends of those slain by Jeffrey Dahmer, the impact is incalculable. This is the father of Dahmer's 15th victim, Jeremiah Weinberger.
His being out in the street was dangerous and terrible. Once he's in jail, he's immaterial.
The mother of Dahmer's 12th victim, Tony Hughes.
You have to lay down with this, get up with this. You have to go each day with this, you know, birthdays, holidays, and just plain memories.
The mother of Matt Turner, Dahmer's 14th victim.
You never think about it until he hit your child, you know, your only child.
I returned to E. Michael McCann. Do you think there was any part of Jeffrey Dahmer that truly regretted what he had done?
Let's juxtaposition the two words, regret and sorrow. A regret, of course, he'd been apprehended his life. He'd not going to be in jail the rest of his life. So he certainly regretted it for his own self-interest. His ingrained lack of respect for human beings to kill a man who just came into your home that you just met a few hours before, who means no ill will to you at all. To kill that man without any aggravation, you're a heartless, murderous, cold-blooded killer. And I don't think cold-blooded killers feel sorrow.
Do you have any lasting thoughts about the Jeffrey Dahmer case?
People that get desires like that, you got to realize they're dangerous, they're destructive. You have to get help. You have to go tell a teacher, your parents, a priest, a minister, a rabbi, I'm having these terrible fantasies. Help me, what should I do? How do I deal with them? Because paraphilia is just it occupies you. And once it gets into you, boy, it really tears you up. It's tough.
Less than a year after Dahmer is incarcerated, Annie Schwartz receives a bizarre phone call.
My book was launching in June of 1992. And oftentimes, people who are involved in the production of the book get advanced copies to people involved in the case. And somehow, Jeffrey Dahmer was able to see some of the previews, some of the excerpts from my book. And he was upset. And he called me at the newsroom. Will you accept a collect call from an inmate at Columbia Correctional Institution, Jeff Dahmer, because you say your own name? And I thought, oh my gosh, is there no end to the pranking that these police officers will do with me? Because remember, the very first night that I got the phone call from my source, the night that Jeffrey Dahmer was discovered, I wasn't clear that that wasn't a prank phone call. So I get this phone call in the newsroom, and I, hello? And he says, yeah, this is Jeff Dahmer. It wasn't, hey, Annie, sup. It was, this is Jeff Dahmer. And I'm stunned. It's like you shot me in the chest. And I said, yes. And he said, I know your book's coming out. Want to make sure that you understand that the only person who's responsible for what I did is me. What he didn't like is that I had interviewed all these psychiatrists who pointed to his upbringing. Oddly, a man that murdered and then dismembered 17 people was upset and was protective about his family. But he was smart, and he knew that when people said, have you ever spoken with him? And I would say, yes. They would say, well, what did he say? And then I would, of course, carry that message.
It's 1994, and Pastor Roy Ratcliffe, a minister in the Church of Christ based in Madison, Wisconsin, gets an unexpected request.
I got a call from a fellow minister who said that he'd gotten a call saying there's an inmate wanting to be baptized. And since I was closer to the prison, would I go and do it? I said, well, I've never done that before, but sure. What's the prisoner's name? He says, well, you might want to sit down for this one. And it was Jeffrey Dahmer.
Had you heard of him before then?
Well, of course, I'd heard about Jeffrey Dahmer because he'd been in the news and it'd been all over the television here, especially in Wisconsin. It was a big deal. So my question then was, well, why does he want to be baptized? What does he think he's doing? What's he hope to accomplish with all this? So those are the questions that I had.
What were your impressions of Jeffrey Dahmer when you first met him?
I didn't quite know what to expect when I first went to prison. I had seen movies, but I really didn't know what to expect. And so I was anticipating seeing him behind a glass wall or talking on a telephone or on a television or something of that nature. So I was quite surprised when they led me to a little room, 10 by 12 feet, with a table and chair, and had me sit down. This is unusual. And then a few minutes later, Jeffrey Dahmer comes to the door, closes the door, shakes my hand, and sits down across from me. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I'm in a room all by myself with a man who's killed other people. I mean, that's kind of a moment there where you're kind of thinking, oh, whoa, what's going on here, So then we began talking, and I said, well, why do you want to be baptized? And he starts talking to me. And I'm, at first of all, impressed with his courtesy and his politeness, and he's very respectful of me, and I'm a little bit surprised by that. I didn't quite know what to expect from someone who'd been in the news and who'd done some terrible things, and what he was talking about, what he wanted to do. So it was much easier talking to him because he was so respectful and so considerate and so forth to me. And so I got the impression that he was genuine. These are concerns that really matter to him a great deal. And as we continued to talk, I became even more and more convinced of that. And I had this sense that he was opening his heart up to me, so that made it much easier for me to talk with him because I felt that he was being truly honest and open with me. A lot of people have asked questions about that because from a distance they don't know. They weren't there, so they can't really determine that, but that's how I assessed the situation. And so I had the sense that he was being very genuine with me and very honest and very sincere about what he was talking about.
So does that mean you trusted him?
Eventually, that would come to that point. When you first meet someone like that, it's hard to really describe it as trust. He's asking me questions, I'm giving him answers. I ask him questions, he's giving me answers. I trust that his answers are honest and true. I mean, in that sense, there's a sense of trust. I don't know that having him babysit my children or take care of my property when I'm gone or something of that nature, as you would think of trust.
Did he share anything with you about his crimes?
Yes, Jeff admired his father very much and wanted to be a scientist like his father, and the lobotomies was an attempt on his part to do something scientific to try to keep people. The point of the lobotomy was to keep the person alive and make them a servant of him. That was what it was all about. Of course, he didn't know how to do it right, and so it ended up always killing them. But there was his effort to try to somehow keep them alive and not kill them, and at the same time establish the fact that he was being scientific. So he saw his father was a scientist, and he wanted to be very much like his father in that sense. As time went on, he was killing more and more people, and he wasn't doing a very good job of putting things out of the way. And so in a very real sense, it was like he was tripping over body parts toward the end.
Jeffrey Dahmer was baptized in prison in front of his family in May 1994. Did Jeffrey Dahmer seem remorseful?
After a while, after he'd been baptized a while, he then confided to me that he felt very remorseful for the things he had done. He felt very bad about the crimes he committed, and said that in his opinion, he probably should have been put to death by the state for what he had done. To which I responded by saying, I agree, you probably should have been put to death by the state because what you did were crimes worthy of death. Now, this is in the context of after he's been baptized, after he's a Christian. So he says to me, well, then if that's the case, am I now sinning against God by living?
Annie Schwartz describes the situation for Dahmer in prison.
Jeffrey Dahmer was in solitary confinement when he first went to Columbia Correctional Institution. And Jeffrey Dahmer told his lawyer, told Jerry Boyle, he said, once I join the general population, he's like, I'm not going to live that long. They're going to kill me. And Jerry Boyle believed it too. That once Dahmer joined the general population, he was not long for this world. He killed 17 men and boys, the majority of whom were men of color. Not a great guy to be in prison. But also, people were very superstitious about him. I mean, they thought he was evil. They thought maybe he was the devil. I mean, all that was going on too.
Prosecuting attorney E. Michael McCann has a similar view.
He must have known he was a target, even when he was in the lockup in Milwaukee, some of the prisoners were that thought he was a racist, obviously giving him their own thoughts. So he must have known our prison system is disproportionately black. He must have known he was at risk.
On July 4th, 1994, as Jeffrey Dahmer sits in the prison chapel, an inmate makes an attempt on his life with a razor blade hidden in a toothbrush. Dahmer receives only superficial wounds. Roy Ratcliffe.
After the attack in July by a Cuban who tried to kill him, I asked him how he got along with the other prisoners. He said he got along well with them. He didn't have any problem with any of them at all. That this fellow was an exception because he wanted to be sent back to Cuba, and then the only way you could figure out how to do that would be by killing someone famous. So as far as I could tell, he seemed to think he got along very well with other prisoners.
Annie Schwartz.
Jeffrey Dahmer joined the general population, and sure enough, in November of 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer is assigned to clean a bathroom along with Jesse Anderson, who is another prisoner. Jesse Anderson was in prison for murdering his wife, and having studied the Charles Stewart case in Boston, had initially told police, "2 black guys did it," was his quote. So he was not exactly a fan favorite inside prison either. So Jeffrey Dahmer and Jesse Anderson, arguably the 2 most high-risk prisoners in that institution, are together cleaning a staff bathroom. And they are unsupervised. There are cameras. Christopher Scarver, who is another inmate, he's in there for murder. For whatever reason, Christopher Scarver took a barbell from the weight area, went into the bathroom, found Jeffrey Dahmer and Jesse Anderson cleaning the bathroom, and beat them both to death.
Dahmer and this other inmate, Jesse Anderson, were attacked in a recreation area, and that there was a great deal of blood.
There is an irony to Dahmer's murder, in that he was killed with the same weapon he used to kill his first victim, Stephen Hicks, over 15 years earlier.
What's interesting about the crime scene is that it's clear that Jesse Anderson fought. The crime scene photos don't really look like Jeffrey Dahmer fought. There was blood spatter. There was a handprint on the wall that was Jeffrey Dahmer's handprint in blood. And the analysis of those crime scene photos from people that look at these things for a living has been, it didn't really look like he put up much of a fight.
At the time of his death, Roy Ratcliffe is probably the closest thing to a friend Jeffrey Dahmer has ever had. When Jeffrey was beaten to death in prison, when he was killed, were you sad?
I was surprised to hear about it on the radio that he had been killed, and at first I thought they must have made a mistake. I was very sad because I felt like I'd lost a friend.
The sister of Jeffrey Dahmer's 11th victim, Earl Lindsay, feels entirely differently. How did you feel when you first heard that he was killed in prison? And he was killed pretty brutally in the prison bathroom.
It doesn't matter. You still had all your body parts. You was intact.
What do you think the impact of all of this was on you personally?
It stole my life. That's the impact. It's like I don't have control over my life anymore. You do the damage control and walk away and leave me hanging. That's the impact.
There will always be those with the potential to become serial killers. What changes with each and every case we investigate are the circumstances in which the killer flourishes. When it comes to Jeffrey Dahmer, a unique moment in time brought on by the AIDS pandemic, traditional ideas of what a vulnerable missing person should look like, and the persuasive power of a polite white man all served to create a cultural blind spot. As Annie Schwartz said back in episode 4, the police antenna simply didn't go up. All but 3 of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims were reported missing. But opportunities were missed, witnesses and victims were ignored, and the dots were never connected. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't even serve 3 years of his 957-year sentence. He himself was dissected in death and cremated without his brain, which was preserved in a jar of formaldehyde at the Dane County Medical Examiner's office in Madison. It had been intended to be donated to medical science. But after a fierce legal battle between Dahmer's mother and father, the brain was released and eventually cremated as well. To this day, researchers are still trying to understand the mind of this monster. Mind of a Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer is produced by Arrow Media for ID. The executive producer for ID is Jessica Lowther. Arrow Media's producer is Rebecca Radiel. Editor, Sirkan Nihat. Audio engineering by Mahoney Audio Post. Our line producer is Philippa Whittle. Our junior production manager is Jody Tanner Wild. Our production coordinator is Shannon Tunnicliffe. And our assistant producer is Isabel Wilson. Our archive producer is Katia Lom. Arrow Media's series producer is Gabrielle Nash, and executive producer is Stuart Penber. Jeffrey Dahmer is played by Andrew Brune. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Ward. You can follow our show wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd love it if you could take a second to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.